Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Edison, and I'm here to guide you into a peaceful slumber. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is as you unwind. So settle in, get cozy, and let the relaxation begin. The decision to move to the mountains came after 25 years of corporate servitude had finally broken my spirit. By March of 2012, I had accumulated enough savings to purchase a modest cabin nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains of northern Georgia. At 52, I craved the solitude that only nature could provide, away from the constant notifications and deadlines that had dominated my existence. The property listing described it as secluded and peaceful, but these words failed to capture the profound isolation that awaited me. 5 acres of densely wooded land surrounded the cabin, which perched precariously on a steep mountainside. The nearest neighbor was nearly 2 miles away as the crow flies, and nearly 4 by the winding gravel road that connected our properties. My wife Judith supported the move, but couldn't join me immediately. Her position at the hospital required a proper transition period, meaning I would spend the first month alone in our new home. The prospect didn't bother me. I'd always been comfortable with solitude. The cabin itself was a sturdy structure built in the 1970s by a retired engineer with a penchant for over-engineering. The foundation was concrete, the walls thick pine, and the roof recently replaced. Inside, the open floor plan featured a kitchen and living area dominated by a stone fireplace, with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom tucked into the back. The front of the house boasted floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the valley below. My first impression upon arriving was how the mountains seemed to swallow sound. The city's constant hum was replaced by a silence so profound it felt almost physical. That first afternoon, I stood on the front porch, listening to absolutely nothing, and felt the weight of 25 years lifting from my shoulders. The real estate agent, an older woman named Dorothy, had been apologetic about the driveway, a quarter-mile stretch of gravel that wound through the forest before connecting to what locals generously called the main road. In reality, it was just another gravel path, barely maintained by the county. "You'll need something with 4-wheel drive for winter," she had advised. "And even then, you might find yourself snowed in occasionally." I had nodded, secretly relishing the idea of forced isolation. As I unpacked my modest belongings that first evening, watching the sun set behind the distant peaks, I couldn't imagine anything disturbing the peace I had found. I was wrong. The first week passed without incident. I established a routine, mornings spent exploring the property, afternoons dedicated to making the cabin more comfortable, and evenings reading by the fireplace. The complete absence of noise pollution allowed me to sleep more soundly than I had in decades. I became acquainted with the local wildlife, deer that grazed at the edge of my clearing each morning, a family of raccoons that investigated my garbage cans despite my best efforts to secure them, and countless birds whose songs formed a natural symphony each dawn. My property extended deep into the forest, bordered by a small stream to the west and another private property to the east. The previous owner had maintained a rudimentary network of trails, which I began clearing and exploring. On the 3rd day, I discovered an old hunting blind, about half a mile from the house, overlooking a natural clearing. It appeared abandoned for years, with rotting floorboards and vegetation reclaiming the structure. The isolation suited me perfectly. My only connection to the outside world was a satellite internet connection that worked when the weather permitted, and a cell phone that captured signal only on the highest point of my property, a rocky outcropping I named Communication Hill. I made weekly trips to the nearest town, a 30-minute drive down the mountain, to stock up on supplies. The local grocery store doubled as a hardware store and general meeting place for the sparse population. During these visits, I exchanged pleasantries with the locals, but never lingered. I was there for solitude, not to build a social network. By the end of the first week, I had mapped most of my property and begun repairs on the cabin's aging deck. Physical labor felt therapeutic after years behind a desk, and I fell into bed each night pleasantly exhausted. On day 8, I received my first visitor, a forest ranger named Bennett, who stopped by to introduce himself. He was a tall, weathered man with a grey beard and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at you. "Just checking in on the new resident," he explained, declining my offer to come inside. "Winter's over, but spring can be tricky. Flash floods, fallen trees blocking roads. Best to be prepared." "I appreciate the warning," I replied. "I've stocked up on essentials." Bennett nodded, his gaze drifting to the forest behind me. "These mountains have been here long before us, and will be here long after. They don't much care for human comfort." With that cryptic statement, he handed me a card with his number and departed, his Forest Service truck grinding down my gravel driveway. That night, I experienced my first storm in the mountains. The rain lashed against the windows with impressive force, and thunder echoed between the peaks with a resonance impossible in the flatlands. I stood at the glass wall facing the valley, watching lightning illuminate the landscape in brilliant flashes, feeling wonderfully small against nature's display. When I finally went to bed, I slept soundly, lulled by the rhythm of the rain on the roof. In retrospect, those first peaceful days were the mountains' way of lowering my guard before revealing their true nature. The subtle shift began on the 12th day. I woke to find the front door ajar, swinging gently in the morning breeze. I was certain I had locked it the night before, a habit ingrained from decades of city living. I checked the house thoroughly, finding nothing missing or disturbed. Must not have pulled it closed properly, I muttered to myself, dismissing the incident. That same afternoon, while clearing brush from one of the more overgrown trails, I experienced an unsettling sensation of being watched. The forest surrounding me seemed suddenly foreign and hostile. I paused, wiping sweat from my brow, and scanned the trees. Nothing moved except the wind through the leaves. Yet the feeling persisted, raising the fine hairs on my arms and neck. After 10 minutes of standing perfectly still, listening intently to the forest sounds, I packed up my tools and returned to the cabin earlier than planned. The following day, I discovered fresh footprints in the mud near my woodpile, too large to be my own. They appeared to approach from the forest, circle the stack of logs, and return the way they came. I followed them to the edge of the tree line, where they disappeared into the underbrush. My first instinct was to call the police, but I reconsidered. What would I report? That someone walked near my cabin? In rural Georgia, trespassing wasn't uncommon. Hunters tracking game, hikers who'd strayed from public lands. Nothing was stolen or damaged. Still, I began locking the doors even during the day. That night I woke abruptly at 2:18 a.m., according to the glowing numbers of my bedside clock. The cabin was silent, yet I felt absolutely certain something had awakened me. I lay motionless, straining to hear anything unusual. After several minutes of nothing but the creaking of the cabin settling, I rose and checked each window and door. All was secure. Outside, the forest was a wall of darkness beyond the feeble reach of my porch light. As I stood at the front window, peering into the night, I noticed a strange configuration of shadows at the edge of the light's reach. Something seemed to move, a slight shift in the darkness that didn't match the wind's pattern through the trees. I flipped on the exterior floods, bathing the front yard in harsh light. Nothing was there. Yet as I turned the floods off and prepared to return to bed, I could have sworn I saw something retreat into the darkness, a shape moving with deliberate purpose rather than the random motion of shadows. Sleep evaded me for the remainder of the night. I sat in the living room with a cup of tea, watching the darkness through the windows until dawn gradually reclaimed the forest. The next morning, I discovered more footprints, this time on the front porch and around the perimeter of the cabin. They were the same size as before, but now they formed a complete circuit of my home, pausing at each window. The implications disturbed me deeply. Someone had been studying my home, looking in at me while I slept. I drove to town that day and purchased additional locks for the doors and windows, along with a shotgun from the local hunting supply store. The owner, a bald man with a friendly smile, didn't question my sudden interest in home security. "Living alone up in these mountains, I'd do the same," he said, showing me how to load and clean the weapon. "Probably just some curious animals, but better safe than sorry." I nodded, not mentioning the distinctly human footprints. By the time I returned to the cabin, I had half convinced myself that my imagination was running wild, a city dweller unused to the natural sounds and movements of the forest. The mountains had a way of playing tricks on the mind. This comforting rationalization lasted exactly 3 days. On my 18th night at the cabin, Judith called to say her departure would be delayed another 2 weeks. I expressed my disappointment, but assured her I was doing fine on my own. We chatted about her work, my progress on the cabin renovations, and the local wildlife I'd observed. I didn't mention the footprints or my growing unease. After hanging up, I prepared a simple dinner and settled in with a book by the fireplace. The evening passed uneventfully until I retired to bed around 10:30 p.m. The night was unusually still, no wind rustling the trees, no distant calls of nocturnal creatures. The silence itself seemed to have substance, pressing against the windows of the cabin. I awoke suddenly at 1:07 a.m., instantly alert. Something had disturbed my sleep, a sound out of place in the night's stillness. I lay motionless, ears straining. For several minutes nothing broke the silence. Then it came, a knock at the front door. Not a tentative tap, but a firm, deliberate knock that resonated through the cabin. 3 distinct impacts, evenly spaced. The rational part of my mind immediately sought explanations. A ranger checking on me, a lost hiker seeking assistance, a neighbor with an emergency. But these rationales couldn't account for the complete absence of vehicle sounds. My driveway's gravel announced approaching cars long before they reached the cabin. I slid silently from bed and retrieved the shotgun from under it. The wood was cool against my palms as I loaded it with trembling hands. Moving to the bedroom doorway, I called out, "Who's there?" No response. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before the knocking resumed. Louder, more insistent. The same pattern. 3 firm knocks. The front door featured a large glass panel that offered a view of the porch and yard beyond. From my position, I couldn't see who stood at the door without exposing myself. The thought of approaching the glass with someone on the other side made my heart hammer against my ribs. "This is private property," I shouted, trying to project confidence. "I'm armed." "Identify yourself." Again, no response, just the oppressive silence. I steeled myself and moved into the hallway, keeping the shotgun leveled. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight as I approached the door. Through the glass, I could see the porch was empty. I lowered the gun slightly, confusion momentarily overtaking fear. Then the knocking came again, but not from the front door. It came from the bedroom window behind me. I whirled around, nearly losing my balance. The knocking continued, migrating to each window of the cabin in turn. Front, side, bedroom, bathroom, kitchen. A methodical circling of my home, as if testing for weaknesses. With shaking hands, I fumbled for my cell phone and dialed 911, only to find no signal. Of course, I needed to be on Communication Hill for service. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it had begun. In its place came a new sound. The soft scrape of something moving along the outer walls, circling the cabin just as the knocking had done. It moved with a deliberate slowness that suggested a taunting familiarity with my fear. I positioned myself in the center of the living room, back to the fireplace, shotgun aimed at the front door. From this vantage point, I could see most of the cabin's interior. The scraping continued its circuit, pausing occasionally as if considering an entry point. For 3 hours, this psychological warfare continued, sometimes knocking, sometimes scraping, sometimes complete silence that proved more terrifying than either. During one of the silent periods, I heard the distinct sound of footsteps on the cabin's roof, measured, deliberate steps directly above my head. At 4:21 a.m., everything stopped. The pre-dawn stillness returned as if nothing had happened. I remained frozen in position, shotgun ready, until the first light of morning filtered through the windows. When I finally gathered the courage to look outside, I found the muddy ground around my cabin crisscrossed with footprints, the same large prints I'd seen earlier. They approached from the forest to the north, circled the entire structure multiple times, and then retreated in the same direction. I followed them to the tree line, shotgun clutched in white-knuckled hands, but lost the trail where the forest floor became a carpet of pine needles. The day after the visitation, I drove to town in a state of exhausted paranoia, constantly checking my rearview mirror. My first stop was the sheriff's office, a modest building adjacent to the town's single traffic light. Sheriff Donovan was a compact man with silver-streaked hair and a weathered face that suggested decades of outdoor work. He listened patiently as I recounted the previous night's events, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad. "And you didn't see anyone?" he asked when I finished. "No, just heard them." "And the footprints? Did you take photos of these prints?" I hadn't, a fact that now seemed incredibly stupid. The sheriff nodded, unsurprised by my oversight. "Terror does that," he said simply. "Makes you forget the obvious. I'll send Deputy Wilson up with you to check things out." Deputy Wilson proved to be a young woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She photographed the footprints around my cabin and took measurements. Her expression remained neutral, but I caught a flicker of concern when she examined the pattern. "They definitely circled your house," she confirmed. "Multiple times. Size 12 boot, probably male given the depth of impression. Could be a hunter trespassing. Could be teenagers looking to scare the new guy. Hard to say." "At 1 in the morning?" I asked. Wilson shrugged. "People do strange things for their own reasons." She handed me a card. "Call if it happens again. We'll increase patrols on the main road, but—" She didn't need to finish. We both knew the chances of catching someone in such remote terrain were slim. After she left, I drove to the local hardware store and purchased motion-activated floodlights, which I installed at each corner of the cabin. I also bought a battery-powered emergency radio, additional locks, and window bars for the bedroom. That evening, I visited the only establishment in town that could reasonably be called a restaurant, a family-owned diner serving classic American comfort food. I wasn't hungry, but I needed to be around people. The waitress, an older woman named Betty, recognized me as the new guy up on Ridgeline Road. As she refilled my coffee, I casually asked if she'd heard of anyone experiencing unusual visitors in the area. Betty's hand paused mid-pour. "What kind of visitors?" "Someone knocking on doors late at night, circling houses." She set the coffee pot down. "You had a night visitor." It wasn't a question. "You know about this?" Betty glanced around the nearly empty diner before sliding into the booth across from me. "It happens every few years. Always to newcomers, always folks living alone in the outer properties. Who is it?" "Nobody knows for certain. Some say it's a drifter who lives in the caves up in the higher elevations. Others think it's someone local with a mean streak. My grandmother used to say it was the mountain itself testing newcomers." "That's not particularly helpful," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Betty shrugged. "No, I suppose it's not. But I can tell you this. In the 30 years I've lived here, no one's ever been hurt by the night visitor. Scared half to death, yes. Actually harmed, no. Has anyone ever seen them? Just glimpses. Tall figure, they say. Always at night, always keeping to the shadows. And the police? Sheriffs investigated every time. Never found anything conclusive. I left the diner with more questions than answers, and a growing sense that the locals viewed these incidents as some kind of rural initiation ritual, not worth serious concern. That night, I barricaded myself in the cabin, shotgun within reach, floodlights primed to illuminate any approach. I didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion claimed me around midnight. No knocking came, no scraping, no footsteps. Just the ordinary sounds of a mountain night, distant owls, the occasional rustle of nocturnal creatures, the house settling into itself. For 4 more nights, nothing unusual occurred. I began to wonder if the entire incident had been magnified by my urban paranoia. A mind unused to rural solitude, constructing threats from natural phenomena. Then came the 5th night, and with it, a revelation. The pattern was becoming clear. 5 nights of peace followed by activity. I hadn't recognized it after the first visitation because I'd attributed the footprints and strange sensations to separate incidents. Now I understood. The presence was establishing a rhythm, perhaps intended to lull me into a false sense of security before each appearance. I prepared accordingly. On the 5th night of peace, I didn't go to bed. Instead, I positioned myself in the darkened living room with a clear view of the approaches to the cabin. The shotgun rested across my knees, and a night vision monocular, an expensive hunting tool I'd purchased in town, sat on the table beside me. At precisely 1:07 a.m., the exact same time as the previous incident, the motion-activated floodlights blazed to life, bathing the front yard in harsh illumination. I raised the monocular to my eye, scanning the tree line. Initially, I saw nothing. Then at the furthest reach of the light, something moved, a figure retreating into the darkness. I caught only a glimpse. Tall, dressed in dark clothing, moving with a fluidity that suggested familiarity with the terrain. The floodlights, which should have been a deterrent, seemed instead to have forced a change in tactics. No knocking came. Instead, I detected movement at the edge of the light's reach, circling, always just beyond clear visibility. For hours, this continued, the figure moving in a wide perimeter around my cabin, occasionally triggering the lights, but never approaching closely enough for identification. It was studying the new security measures, adapting its approach. Near dawn, the pattern changed. The figure retreated to the forest edge and remained stationary, visible only as a darker shape against the pre-dawn darkness. It seemed to be watching, waiting, for what I couldn't fathom. As the sky lightened, I raised the monocular for one final look. The figure was gone, but something had been left behind, an object at the edge of my clearing. When full daylight arrived, I ventured out with the shotgun to investigate. A small cairn of stones had been constructed, 7 smooth river rocks balanced in a precise tower. The arrangement was clearly deliberate, not a natural formation. I circled it cautiously, looking for any clue to its purpose. The top stone had been positioned so that one flat side faced directly toward my cabin. Upon closer inspection, I discovered something had been etched into the stone's surface, a crude symbol resembling a spiral with a line bisecting it. The marking appeared freshly carved, tiny stone fragments still clinging to the grooves. I photographed the cairn from multiple angles before dismantling it, half expecting to find something hidden beneath the stones. There was nothing, just compressed earth where the lowest rock had sat. That afternoon, I drove to town and showed the photos to Sheriff Donovan, who studied them with a frown. "This is new," he admitted. "The night visitor usually just makes noise, leaves footprints. Never left any markers before. What does it mean?" I asked. "Could be nothing. Could be someone playing an elaborate joke, or they're escalating. Becoming bolder." He rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "I'd offer to put a deputy on your property, but frankly, we don't have the manpower." I left the sheriff's office feeling distinctly unprotected by local law enforcement. On impulse, I stopped at the town library, a small brick building with an antiquated computer system and a surprisingly well-maintained local history section. The librarian, an elderly man named Gregory, listened to my situation with academic interest. When I described the symbol, his eyebrows rose slightly. "May I see the photograph?" he asked. I showed him the clearest image on my phone. Gregory studied it for a long moment before retrieving a large leather-bound volume from a locked cabinet behind the desk. "This is a compilation of local folklore and history," he explained, carefully turning brittle pages. "Compiled in the 1930s by a WPA worker documenting Appalachian culture." He found what he was looking for and turned the book toward me. On the yellowed page was a hand-drawn illustration nearly identical to the symbol on the stone. "It's called a watcher mark," Gregory said. "According to local legend, it was used by mountain people to designate outsiders who were under observation by the community, sometimes as a warning, sometimes as a prelude to more direct action." "What kind of action?" I asked, mouth suddenly dry. Gregory closed the book carefully. "The accounts vary. In most cases, it was simply a signal for the community to shun the marked individual. In more extreme instances," he paused, "let's just say the mountains have their own justice system, historically speaking." "You're saying someone from the community is targeting me. I'm saying this symbol has historical significance in these mountains. Whether the person using it understands that significance is another question entirely." Left the library with photocopies of the relevant pages and a growing certainty that my night visitor was not some random drifter, but someone with connection to the area's history and traditions. That night, I didn't wait for the visitor to come to me. I decided to change the dynamic. Armed with the shotgun, a powerful flashlight, and a handheld GPS, I positioned myself in the hunting blind I'd discovered earlier. It offered a clear view of the cabin while providing concealment. My plan was simple: observe who or what approached my home, document their presence, and if necessary, confront them from a position of advantage. I settled in at sunset, prepared for a long night of surveillance. Hours passed uneventfully. Periodically, I checked the GPS to ensure I could find my way back in darkness if needed. The night grew increasingly cold, my breath forming small clouds in the hunting blind. At 1:05 a.m., 2 minutes before the expected time of appearance, I detected movement at the forest edge opposite my position. A tall figure emerged from the trees, moving with extraordinary stealth. Even watching intently, I could barely track their progress through the underbrush. The figure paused at the edge of the clearing, surveying the cabin. It appeared to be a man, dressed in dark clothing that blended with the forest. Something about his posture suggested tension, a predator assessing potential danger. After several minutes of observation, he moved toward the cabin, triggering the floodlights. Rather than retreating, he froze, becoming a stark silhouette in the artificial glare. He was indeed tall, well over 6 feet, and wore what appeared to be a canvas jacket and work pants. A dark hat obscured his features. For nearly 5 minutes, he remained motionless in the light, as if deliberately allowing himself to be seen. Then, with deliberate slowness, he raised one hand and made a gesture toward the cabin, a circular motion followed by a slashing movement. The gesture completed, he turned and looked directly toward the hunting blind where I was concealed. Though I couldn't see his face clearly, I felt his awareness of my presence with absolute certainty. He knew I was watching. Abandoning stealth, I raised the shotgun and chambered a round, the mechanical sound carrying clearly in the night air. The figure didn't flinch or flee. Instead, he nodded slowly, a deliberate acknowledgement, before turning and walking unhurriedly back into the forest. I remained in the blind, shotgun trained on the spot where he disappeared until dawn broke. He didn't return. When daylight finally arrived, I approached the spot where he had stood. The ground revealed clear boot prints, the same size and pattern I'd seen around my cabin previously. Beside them, something gleamed in the morning light. A small metallic object had been pressed into the soft earth, an old coin. I carefully extracted it, brushing away the dirt. It appeared to be a silver dollar, dated 1899, with a small hole drilled near the edge. The hole suggested it had once been worn as a pendant or charm. This tangible evidence renewed my determination to identify the visitor. I photographed the coin and the footprints before returning to the cabin to prepare for a trip to town. At the sheriff's office, Donovan examined the coin with interest. Old coins have significance in mountain folklore, he explained. They're said to ward off evil or bring protection. The fact that it's from 1899 is interesting. That's the year of the Wilson Hollow incident. What incident? Donovan hesitated. A dark chapter in local history. A community of outsiders settled in Wilson Hollow, about 5 miles from your place. They weren't welcomed by the established families. After several months of escalating tensions, the settlement was burned. Official records call it an accident, but, he shrugged, local stories say differently. You think my visitor is connecting me to this somehow? I think someone's trying to communicate in a language you don't understand. He handed back the coin. The question is whether they're trying to warn you or threaten you. How do I find out which? You could leave, Donovan suggested. Many do after experiencing the night visitor, and if I don't want to leave. The sheriff studied me thoughtfully. Then you need to speak with someone who understands the old ways. There's a woman named Eleanor Ridgway who lives up on Pine Mountain. She's the closest thing we have to a local historian. If anyone can interpret what's happening, it's her. Finding Eleanor proved challenging. She lived without a phone at the end of a barely passable dirt track. When I finally located her home, a well-maintained cabin nearly a century old, I was greeted by a spry woman in her 70s with alert eyes and a directness that bypassed all social niceties. "You're the new one on Ridgeline Road," she stated before I could introduce myself. "The one with the night visitor." News traveled fast in small communities. I didn't bother asking how she knew. "I need to understand what's happening," I said. Eleanor gestured me inside. The cabin's interior was an eclectic mix of traditional Appalachian crafts and modern conveniences. She indicated a chair at a worn kitchen table and sat opposite me. "Show me what you've brought," she said. I placed the coin on the table between us. Eleanor didn't touch it, merely studied it with narrowed eyes. "Where was this found?" I explained the previous night's encounter in detail. Eleanor listened without interruption, her expression unchanging. "The visitor is testing you," she said finally. "The watching, the circling, the marks, all tests. The coin is the final piece. Testing me for what? To see if you belong." She tapped the coin with one finger. "This particular coin has history. It belonged to a man named Joseph Keegan, the last outsider to successfully integrate into the mountain community after being tested. That was in 1947. How do you know that?" "Because Joseph was my father." She picked up the coin, turning it over in her fingers. "After his death, this coin disappeared from our family collection. I always wondered where it went. So the person testing me stole this coin, or inherited it from whoever did." She handed the coin back to me. "The fact that it was given to you is significant. It means you're being offered a choice." "What choice?" "Stay and become part of the mountain, or leave and remain a stranger. The old families have their ways of protecting what they consider theirs. The night visitor is their messenger." "Who is he?" I pressed. Eleanor smiled thinly. "That's not my information to share. But I can tell you this, he'll come one more time. When he does, your response will determine whether you find peace here or not." I returned to the cabin, with Eleanor's words echoing in my mind. The coin felt heavy in my pocket, a tangible connection to a tradition I was only beginning to comprehend. According to Eleanor, the third visit would come exactly 5 nights after the second, maintaining the established pattern. I spent those days in preparation, not for confrontation but for communication. I needed to demonstrate my respect for the land and its traditions without surrendering my right to be there. Eleanor had given me specific instructions for what mountain people called making peace with the watching. On the 5th night, I didn't hide or arm myself. Instead, I set 2 chairs on the front porch facing each other. Between them, I placed a small table with 2 glasses and a bottle of locally distilled whiskey, a specific brand Eleanor had recommended, produced by one of the old families. As 1 a.m. approached, I took my seat and waited, the coin placed deliberately on the table beside the whiskey. The night was clear, a 3/4 moon, providing enough illumination to see the edge of the forest without artificial light. I had disabled the motion sensors. At precisely 1:07 a.m., the figure emerged from the trees. He paused at the forest edge, observing the setup on the porch. For several long minutes, neither of us moved, a tableau of tension and possibility. Finally, he approached, moving with the same fluid grace I'd observed before. As he drew closer, details emerged: a weathered face with a grey beard, deep-set eyes under the brim of a worn hat, hands that showed decades of manual labor. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps, studying me without expression. "I've spoken with Eleanor Ridgway," I said, breaking the silence. "I understand this is a test." The man nodded, almost imperceptibly. "I respect the traditions of this place," I continued, "and I wish to live here in peace. Not as an intruder, but as a caretaker." I gestured to the empty chair across from me. For a moment, I thought he would turn and disappear back into the forest. Instead, he slowly ascended the steps and stood beside the offered seat. "Joseph Keegan's coin," he said, his voice rough from disuse or age. "Eleanor told you its meaning?" "That it represents a choice, belonging or remaining separate." He nodded and finally sat. I poured 2 fingers of whiskey into each glass and slid one toward him. He made no move to take it. "This land has memory," he said. "It remembers those who treated it well and those who didn't. The people are the same. I intend to treat both with respect. Intentions are easy, living them is harder." He finally picked up the glass, studying the amber liquid. "Why here? Why these mountains?" It was the question I'd expected, the one Eleanor had warned would come. My answer would determine everything. "Because I don't want to change this place," I said carefully. "I want it to change me." He considered this, then raised his glass slightly. To honest words, we drank. The whiskey burned pleasantly, warming my chest. "You have questions," he stated. "Many, but I'll start with the most pressing. Will you continue to visit in the night?" A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. "Not in the same way. My watching is done. And the result? You'll stay. Whether you belong, that takes time to prove." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small wooden object, which he placed on the table. It was a carving of a bear, expertly crafted from a single piece of wood, its surface polished by handling. "My father made this, and his father before him. It's a token of the mountains. Keep it visible in your home. Those who understand will recognize it." I picked up the carving, feeling its surprising weight. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Accepting the watching is just the beginning. These mountains demand much from those who choose them." We finished our drinks in silence. When his glass was empty, he stood and extended his hand. I rose and shook it, feeling calluses that spoke of decades of hard labor. "My name is Samuel," he said. "Most folks call me Ridge Sam. If you need guidance, ask for me in town. I've been there several times." "No one mentioned you." "They wouldn't until now." He released my hand. "The old ways aren't dead, just quiet. Now you've been seen. Now you can see, too." With that cryptic statement, he descended the steps and walked away, not toward the forest, but down my driveway. Minutes later, I heard the distant sound of an engine starting, the first confirmation that my visitor used mechanical transportation. The night visitor never returned to my cabin. Instead, I began to notice subtle changes in how I was treated in town. Shopkeepers who had been politely distant became conversational. I received invitations to community events that hadn't been mentioned before. Dorothy, the real estate agent, stopped by with a homemade pie and admitted she'd been worried about my adjustment period. 2 weeks later, Judith finally joined me at the cabin. By then, I had integrated into the community enough to understand that our acceptance wasn't guaranteed by my interaction with Ridge Sam. It was merely the beginning of a longer process. The mountains had their own rhythm, their own rules. Those who respected them found peace. Those who didn't eventually left. The night visitor was simply the first guardian of a tradition older than any living memory, ensuring that newcomers understood the choice before them. On our first evening together in our new home, I showed Judith the bear carving, now prominently displayed on our mantel. I told her a modified version of events, enough to explain its significance without alarming her. "The locals have their traditions," I concluded. "This is a sign that we're welcome. She examined the carving with artist's eyes, appreciating its craftsmanship. "It's beautiful. Did you meet the carver?" I thought of Ridge Sam, of our midnight conversation, of the ancient coin and its meaning. "Yes," I replied. "I believe we understand each other now." That night I slept soundly, for the first time since moving to the mountains. The forest had tested me, and I had passed the first trial. What future tests awaited remained to be seen, but I faced them without fear. The mountains had shared their first secret with me. In time, perhaps they would share more. The call from Javier came on a dreary Tuesday in September 2018. I hadn't heard his voice in nearly 7 years, not since we'd both moved away from Calgary to pursue different careers. Time and distance had eroded our once ironclad friendship into occasional social media interactions and promised reunions that never materialized. "Gregory," he said, his voice crackling through my aging phone speaker. "It's been too long. I'm back in Alberta for a month. Remember all those trails we used to conquer?" At 42, I had settled into a comfortable routine. My hiking boots, once worn daily, now collected dust in my garage, alongside camping gear I hadn't touched in years. The muscles that had carried me up countless mountain trails had softened, hidden beneath the evidence of too many office lunches and too little movement. "Heart Mountain," I replied, memories flooding back. "We always said we'd complete the entire horseshoe circuit. That's exactly what I was thinking. What do you say? Next Saturday, for old time's sake." I hesitated, mentally cataloguing my deteriorated stamina, but nostalgia won. "I'm in." The week passed in a flurry of hasty preparations. I dug out my hiking gear, purchased new moisture-wicking socks, and even attempted a few preparatory walks around my neighborhood. By Friday night, anticipation had overwhelmed my initial reluctance. I packed and repacked my day pack, checking weather forecasts obsessively. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear. I met Javier at the trailhead parking lot just after 7 a.m., the September air carrying the first hints of autumn's approach. He looked older. Grey speckled his once jet-black hair, and crow's feet framed his eyes, but his smile remained unchanged. "Ready for this?" he asked, shouldering his pack with practiced ease. I nodded, though doubt lingered. The mountain before us seemed more imposing than I remembered, its jagged profile cutting against the cloudless sky with threatening precision. "As ready as I'll ever be." The first hour passed pleasantly enough. We fell into our old rhythm, Javier taking point while I followed slightly behind, our conversation flowing easily between shared memories and updates on our divergent lives. The trail began gently, winding through sparse woodland before the serious climb began. "My doctor says I need to watch my blood pressure," Javier confessed as we paused for water. 45 isn't what it used to be." I laughed, grateful for the break. "Tell me about it. Remember when we'd race to summit points? I'd need helicopter evacuation if I tried that now." Around the 2-hour mark, we encountered our first fellow hikers, a young couple in their 20s, equipped with technical climbing gear that made our day packs look amateur. They moved with enviable ease, the woman's long braids swinging rhythmically as she navigated difficult terrain. "Morning," the man called, his expression friendly beneath a blue helmet. "Beautiful day for it." His companion smiled, adjusting her harness. "You guys heading for the full horseshoe?" "That's the plan," Javier replied, though I noted the slight wheeze in his voice that suggested otherwise. "Us too," she said. "We're going to free climb some of the sections on the north face. Should be epic." They continued upward, their bodies moving with practiced precision, while Javier and I exchanged knowing glances. We watched them ascend, their colorful gear, her red helmet and his blue one, visible for several minutes against the gray limestone. "Remember when that was us?" I asked. Javier wiped sweat from his forehead. "Were we ever that good?" "In our minds, maybe." We continued our ascent, but each step grew increasingly laborious. What my topographic map described as moderate incline felt vertical to my burning quadriceps. By the time we reached the first significant viewpoint, My shirt clung to my back, soaked through with sweat. I think, Javier managed between heavy breaths, we may have overestimated ourselves. I nodded, staring at the path ahead. A challenging scramble-up loose scree, followed by an exposed ridge walk. The full horseshoe circuit stretched beyond that, intimidating in its scale and technical requirements. Maybe we should re-evaluate, I suggested, trying to mask my relief when Javier nodded. There's that secondary trail, Javier said, consulting his map. The one that follows the western slope. Still good views, but less technical. Our pride wounded, but our sense of self-preservation intact, we adjusted our route. The alternative path descended slightly before contouring around, rather than over, several difficult features. As we navigated this gentler trail, we passed several hiking groups, families with children, elderly couples moving with cautious determination, and solo hikers lost in their own thoughts. Good choice, a passing hiker in his 60s commented with knowing wisdom. The full circuit is brutal these days. Took me 3 attempts last summer. His validation eased our disappointment somewhat, though I still felt the sting of concession. We had once been avid mountaineers, tackling challenges that now seemed impossible. Accepting physical limitations felt like surrendering to time itself. Around 11 a.m., we stopped to admire a particularly spectacular vista. The valley stretched below us, the river a silver ribbon, winding through verdant forest. Above us, we could occasionally glimpse other hikers on the main trail, tiny figures moving along exposed ridgelines. I think I see our climbing friends, Javier said, pointing to a distant section where the red and blue helmets stood out against the rock face. I watched through binoculars as they expertly navigated a challenging section, their movements purposeful and efficient. They're making good time. We continued along our less ambitious route, eventually reaching a pleasant plateau beside a small seasonal stream. The water bubbled cheerfully over smooth stones, the sound creating a peaceful backdrop for our much-needed rest. Perfect lunch spot, Javier declared, unslinging his pack and retrieving a carefully wrapped sandwich. I agreed, settling onto a flat boulder and stretching my aching legs. The sun had reached its zenith, bathing the landscape in bright midday light that highlighted every crevice and contour of the surrounding terrain. Despite the altered route, contentment washed over me. Perhaps we weren't conquering the mountain as planned, but we were here, reconnecting with both nature and each other. Our lunch lasted longer than intended. We reminisced about previous adventures, sharing stories that grew more exaggerated with each telling. I found myself relaxing fully for the first time in months, the mountain air clearing work stress from my mind like wind dispersing fog. "What's that?" Javier asked suddenly, tilting his head. "Did you hear something?" I listened, but detected only the gentle rustle of wind through sparse vegetation and the consistent murmur of the stream. "Just the water." He frowned, his expression troubled. "Thought I heard something else. Like I don't know." Never mind. We packed our garbage meticulously, a habit ingrained from years of wilderness ethics, and prepared to continue. As I secured my pack, I noticed Javier staring intently toward the higher trail. "Everything okay?" He shook his head slowly. "Just a weird feeling. Probably nothing." I understood. Mountains inspired contradictory emotions, awe and insignificance, freedom and vulnerability. Every experienced hiker developed a certain intuition, a sensitivity to subtle shifts in environment or atmosphere that might signal changing weather or potential hazards. "We should start heading back," I suggested, checking my watch. "Don't want to lose daylight." Javier nodded, his previous cheerfulness dimmed by whatever thoughts had captured his attention. We rejoined our chosen path, now beginning its gradual descent toward the valley floor. The trail followed the stream for a while before diverging eastward. "Look at that," I said, pointing to a vibrant cluster of alpine wildflowers clinging improbably to a rocky outcrop. "Amazing what survives up here." But Javier remained distracted, his responses becoming increasingly monosyllabic. Twice he stopped abruptly, staring back up toward the higher trail, though nothing was visible from our position. His unease gradually infected my own mood, replacing contentment with inexplicable anxiety. "Seriously, what's wrong?" I finally asked. "I can't explain it," he replied. "Something doesn't feel right." I was about to dismiss his concern when a distant sound caught my attention. Not a scream or shout, but something less definable. A rumble, a shifting of stones. Whatever it was dissipated quickly, leaving me uncertain whether I'd actually heard anything at all. The rest of our descent proceeded in tense silence, both of us scanning the landscape with heightened vigilance. The path eventually reunited with the stream we'd lunched beside, now wider and deeper as it gathered volume from various mountain tributaries. I spotted it first, a splash of unnatural color amid the natural browns and grays of the streambed. Something man-made, out of place in this wilderness setting. "What's that?" I asked, pointing toward the object. Javier squinted. "Looks like a shoe." We approached cautiously. The item sat partially submerged in shallow water, a climbing shoe, its distinctive rubber sole and tight lacing system unmistakable. The brand's logo remained visible on the heel. "Someone's having a rough day," I remarked, reaching to retrieve it. The shoe was surprisingly heavy, waterlogged but relatively new. Must have lost it recently. I turned to show Javier, but his attention had fixed downstream. His face had drained of color, lips parted slightly in an expression of pure horror. For a moment I thought he might be having the heart attack he'd joked about earlier. "Javier, what's—" He didn't respond, just pointed with a trembling finger. I followed his gesture, scrambling over several boulders to gain a better vantage point. What I saw next demolished any sense of peace the day had offered. Approximately 30 meters downstream, partially obscured by a bend in the creek, lay two human forms. Even from this distance, their unnatural positioning revealed the truth my mind recoiled from processing. Their bodies rested in the shallow water, limbs arranged in positions human anatomy simply doesn't permit. One figure lay face down, climbing helmet still secured, though cracked completely through. The second lay partially across the first, neck bent at an impossible angle, eyes open and staring at the indifferent sky. Most haunting were the colors, a red helmet and a blue one. The young couple we'd seen earlier, their enthusiasm and vitality now extinguished. "Oh God," I whispered, my lunch threatening to reappear. "Oh God, no." Javier hadn't moved, frozen in place like the boulders surrounding us. "We just saw them," he said, voice barely audible. "They were just—" Reality crashed over me in horrifying clarity. These vibrant people we'd spoken with hours earlier had somehow fallen. Their expertise and equipment insufficient protection against whatever had occurred. They remained secured to each other by climbing rope, suggesting they'd been roped together during their accident. My mind calculated the timing with nauseating precision. They must have fallen while we ate lunch, perhaps even as Javier had heard that unidentifiable sound. While we'd shared stories and savored our food, these two had experienced their final, terrifying moments mere hundreds of meters away. Why didn't they scream? I asked, the question escaping before I could contain it. Javier shook his head, unable to answer. The silence following our discovery stretched painfully, neither of us knowing how to proceed. Training and wilderness first aid courses dictated checking for signs of life. But the catastrophic injuries visible even from our position eliminated any hope of survival. "We need to—" I began, but couldn't finish the sentence. What exactly did one do in such circumstances? The decision was temporarily postponed by the sound of voices approaching from behind. Cheerful, ordinary conversation that seemed obscene against our grim discovery. A family rounded the bend. Parents in their 30s, leading two children, perhaps 8 and 10 years old, all dressed in matching outdoor gear and carrying small backpacks. "They can't see this," Javier whispered urgently. "The kids." I nodded and moved quickly, intercepting the family before they could proceed further. My smile felt grotesque, plastered across my face like a Halloween mask. "Hello there," I called with forced cheerfulness. Beautiful day, isn't it? The father nodded pleasantly, while the children eyed me with curiosity. Certainly is. You folks heading back down? Actually, I said, lowering my voice, could I speak with you privately for a moment? I glanced meaningfully at the children, hoping he would understand. Confusion crossed his features before comprehension dawned. Kids, why don't you and Mom check out those cool rocks over there? I'll be right back. His wife gave me a questioning look, but complied, leading the children toward a small outcropping several meters away. The father approached me cautiously. Is everything okay? I kept my voice low. There's been an accident. 2 climbers downstream. They didn't make it. It's not something your children should see. Horror registered immediately. Are you certain they're... Yes, I replied grimly. It's bad. Very bad. He ran a hand through his hair, processing. There's a ranger station about 2 kilometers back down the trail. I'll head there immediately, and you and your friend will stay with them, Javier interjected, having approached silently during our conversation. Make sure no one else stumbles onto the scene. The father nodded gratefully. I'll run the whole way. Thank you for stopping us. He rejoined his family, explaining some sanitized version of events that prompted them to turn back quickly. The curious glances from his wife and children lingered until they disappeared around the bend, their previously carefree day now overshadowed by proximity to tragedy. You think he'll make it to the ranger station quickly? I asked. Javier checked his watch. Even at a fast walk, 20 to 30 minutes. If he runs some sections, maybe 15. Those 15 minutes stretched interminably. We positioned ourselves as unofficial sentries, warning away the few hikers who approached while avoiding explicit details. Most accepted our vague explanation of trail hazard ahead without question. But one insistent man required Javier physically blocking his path before reluctantly turning back. The ranger arrived with impressive speed, the sound of his ATV engine breaking the weighted silence approximately 18 minutes after the family's departure. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 30, but moved with professional efficiency. Where are they? He asked without preamble, medical kit in hand, though we had made clear there would be no survivors. We guided him to the site, maintaining a respectful distance as he documented the scene with photographs and spoke quietly into his radio. Words like retrieval team, accident investigation, and next of kin drifted to us on the gentle breeze. After several minutes, he approached us. I need your contact information. You'll need to provide statements, but that can wait until tomorrow. We supplied our details mechanically, the administrative requirements feeling surreally mundane against the backdrop of death. Did you witness the accident? The ranger asked. No, I replied. We spoke with them earlier this morning up on the main trail. They mentioned planning to free climb sections of the north face. We found them maybe 20 minutes before the father went for help, Javier added. The ranger nodded, making notes. You can head back down now. A recovery team will be here shortly. They'll need space to work. Permission granted, we gathered our packs with numbed movements. As we prepared to leave, I found myself unable to resist a final glance at the bodies, at the people they had been just hours earlier. The woman's long braid now floated gently in the current, undone from its tight plait. The man's outstretched hand seemed to reach for something just beyond grasp. There's nothing more we could have done, the ranger said, misinterpreting my hesitation. From their injuries, death would have been instantaneous. I nodded, unsure whether this information provided comfort or deepened the horror. Instantaneous death meant no suffering, but also no chance for intervention, no possibility that different circumstances might have changed the outcome. We began our descent in silence, each lost in private thoughts. The trail that had seemed so inviting that morning now felt sinister, each step carrying us farther from the scene, but not from the memory. Do you think they knew? Javier asked suddenly, breaking our extended silence. Right before it happened. Do you think they knew they were going to die? I considered the question, remembering the confidence in their movements, the expertise evident in their equipment and approach. I don't know. Maybe there was a moment of recognition, or maybe it happened too quickly. I keep thinking about what they might have felt, he continued. That transition from being alive to not. I understood his fixation. The abruptness of their end, vibrant and ambitious one moment, motionless the next, highlighted the fragility of our own existence with uncomfortable clarity. Neither of us slept well that night. I provided my official statement the following morning, recounting the events with detached precision while avoiding the emotional details that truly defined the experience. The detective noted my information dispassionately, explaining that preliminary investigation suggested equipment failure rather than human error, though the investigation remained ongoing. Days passed, then weeks. The incident appeared briefly in local news. 2 experienced climbers die in mountain accident, with minimal details and standard safety warnings. Their names were printed: William Robertson, 26, and Amelia Novak, 24. Graduate students at the university, engaged to be married the following summer. I found myself dwelling on peripheral details. Had they been saving for their wedding? Did they share an apartment with traces of both their lives intertwined? Who had the unbearable task of emptying their refrigerator, cancelling their plans, notifying their friends? Javier and I spoke frequently in the aftermath. A renewed connection forged stronger through shared trauma. We dissected the experience repeatedly, searching for meaning or lessons that remained stubbornly elusive. I can't stop wondering if we could have saved them somehow, I admitted during one late-night phone call, nearly 2 months after the incident. If we'd chosen the main trail instead, might we have seen them in trouble? Warned them about something? Mad thinking leads nowhere good, Javier responded firmly. We made the choices we made. So did they. The mountain doesn't care about any of it. He was right, of course. Mountains exist beyond human morality or narrative. They neither punish nor reward. They simply are. Our desperate search for meaning reflected our own need for order, rather than any inherent purpose to the tragedy. Hiking ceased completely for both of us. My boots returned to their dusty corner. My pack remained unpacked. The thought of returning to any trail, let alone Heart Mountain, triggered vivid flashbacks, the unnatural angles of broken bodies, the contrast of bright helmets against grey stone, the gentle movement of water around unresponsive forms. It wasn't until April 2023, nearly 5 years later, that Javier called with another invitation. Different mountain, he clarified quickly. Gentle trail. Just a day hike. I hesitated, uncertain whether enough time had passed. I don't know if I'm ready. We don't have to decide now, he said. Just think about it. 2 weeks later, we met at a trailhead 3 hours from Heart Mountain. The path was indeed gentle, populated with families and casual hikers rather than technical climbers. We moved cautiously, our packs deliberately light, our expectations minimal. Halfway up, we paused beside a small stream. Nothing like the one from our memories. Sunlight dappled through overhead foliage, creating shifting patterns on clear water. I still think about them, I admitted. William and Amelia. Sometimes I dream about them. Javier nodded. Me too. I looked them up online once. They were researching climate change impacts on alpine ecosystems, published papers together. This new information, these lives extending beyond their deaths, somehow eased something within me. They were more than the broken bodies we had found. They had existed fully before that moment, contributing to knowledge that outlived them. We continued upward, our pace deliberately measured. The summit offered modest views. Nothing spectacular, nothing dangerous. We stayed briefly before beginning our descent, reaching the parking lot with daylight to spare. It wasn't so bad, Javier said as we loaded our minimal gear. Different, but not bad. I agreed, though the experience felt muted compared to our previous adventures. Perhaps that subdued quality was appropriate, a respectful acknowledgement that while we continued, others did not have that privilege. As I drove home that evening, I found myself contemplating mortality with unexpected calmness. The horror of what we'd witnessed would never completely fade, but its sharp edges had softened enough to accommodate life's continuation. William and Amelia had died doing what they loved, fully engaged with the world, rather than insulated from its risks. The mountains would remain long after all of us. They would claim more lives and inspire countless others. Their indifference contained neither cruelty nor comfort, only the stark reminder that each moment exists to be lived fully, with both respect for danger and appreciation for beauty. I never returned to Heart Mountain. Some memories create boundaries that needn't be crossed again. But I did return to hiking, carrying with me both caution and gratitude, twin lessons from that September day when two strangers unwittingly taught me about life through their deaths. The last week of August 2024 arrived with a bittersweet inevitability. In 7 days, I would be heading back to Westlake University for my junior year, leaving behind the comfortable monotony of my hometown and summer job. At 21, I was caught in that strange limbo between adolescence and adulthood, old enough to crave independence, but young enough to feel nostalgic about leaving home. We need one more adventure before summer ends, Vanessa declared during our shift at the local coffee shop. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, and the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows highlighted the determination in her eyes. "What did you have in mind?" I asked, wiping down the counter after the midday rush. "Camping," she replied without hesitation. "Nothing intense, just an overnight trip. Enough to say we did something besides working and binge-watching shows all summer." Daniela, who had been refilling the napkin dispensers, nodded enthusiastically. "I'm in. God knows I need to see something other than my bedroom ceiling and this cafe." The three of us had been friends since freshman year of high school. Vanessa was the planner, always organized despite her carefree demeanor. Daniela was the adventurous one, first to try anything new. And me, I was the cautious one. The voice of reason that usually got overruled but came prepared with the first aid kit anyway. By the end of our shift, we had a plan. Vanessa's older brother had told her about a secluded hiking trail about an hour away. Beautiful, peaceful, and typically deserted on weekdays. We would leave early Thursday morning, hike in, camp overnight, and return Friday afternoon. "It'll be perfect," Vanessa assured us. "One last hurrah before we're buried in textbooks." Again, none of us could have imagined how that simple plan would spiral into the most terrifying experience of our lives. Thursday morning arrived with perfect weather, clear blue skies with just enough clouds to keep the temperature comfortable. I woke early, double-checking my backpack before Vanessa's car pulled into my driveway at 7 a.m. Daniela was already in the passenger seat, her blonde hair catching the morning light as she waved enthusiastically. "Ready for some nature therapy?" she called as I tossed my pack into the trunk. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, climbing into the back seat. "Did you guys remember bug spray? Last time we went hiking, I looked like I had chicken pox." Vanessa laughed, pulling away from the curb. "Got it. Plus sunscreen, extra batteries, and those little packets of tuna you like." The car radio blasted our favorite songs as we drove with the windows down, singing at the top of our lungs without a care for how we sounded. For that hour on the road, we were simply three friends enjoying the last fragments of summer freedom. No responsibilities, no deadlines, just the open road and the promise of adventure. Halfway to our destination, Daniela turned down the music. "We can't have a proper camping trip without beer," she announced. "We're not 21, I reminded her. "Speak for yourself," Vanessa said, pulling into a gas station. "I turned 21 last month, remember?" "But you don't drink," I pointed out. "Details," she said with a dismissive wave. "Besides, I'm not buying. Daniela's ID might work." While Vanessa pumped gas, Daniela strutted confidently into the store. I watched through the window as she approached the counter, flashing her most charming smile at the clerk. Minutes later, she returned empty-handed, her expression sour. "No luck?" I asked, unable to hide my amusement. "The guy wouldn't even look at the ID," she complained, sliding back into her seat. "Said he knew we were college students the minute we pulled up." As Vanessa finished with the pump, a truck pulled in beside us. The driver, a man in his late 20s or early 30s wearing a navy blue flannel shirt, stepped out and glanced our way. He was average height with short brown hair and the kind of stubble that suggested he hadn't shaved for a few days rather than cultivating a beard. At first glance, he seemed ordinary enough. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly deep for his frame. "No, just getting gas," Vanessa replied politely but distantly. He nodded, then leaned against his truck. "Heading somewhere fun?" Something about his casual interest made my stomach tighten. His gaze moved between the three of us, lingering just long enough to make my skin crawl. "Just a day trip," Daniela answered vaguely, surprising me with her sudden caution. The man smiled, revealing perfectly straight teeth. "Camping, huh? I see the gear in your trunk." I hadn't noticed that the trunk was still partially open, exposing our backpacks and tent. "Need any help with that?" he continued, taking a step closer. "I know all the best spots around here." "We're good, thanks," Vanessa said firmly, closing the trunk with a definitive thud. "My brother already told us where to go." "Ah, well, have fun then," he replied, his smile never wavering. "Beautiful day for it." As we drove away, I glanced back to see him watching our car until we turned onto the main road. "That was weird," I muttered. Daniela shrugged. "Just being friendly, I guess." But something about the encounter lingered in my mind like a bad taste. I couldn't shake the feeling that his interest was more than casual politeness. The trailhead was exactly where Vanessa's brother had described, a small clearing with space for about 5 cars, marked by a weathered wooden sign. We were the only ones there, which simultaneously thrilled and unnerved me. Privacy was nice, but isolation came with its own concerns. "Wow, your brother wasn't kidding about having the place to ourselves," Daniela remarked, stretching after the drive. Vanessa checked her phone. No signal. "Exactly as advertised." "Great," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic despite the twinge of anxiety in my chest. "Just us and the great outdoors." We shouldered our packs and began the hike. The trail started easily enough, winding through sun-dappled woods, with the occasional clearing offering views of distant hills. Birds called to each other overhead, and wildflowers dotted the path's edge. Under different circumstances, I would have found it peaceful. But as we hiked deeper into the forest, a peculiar sensation began to creep up my spine. Every so often I would turn around, certain I had heard something, footsteps perhaps, or the deliberate snap of a twig, only to see nothing but the empty trail behind us. "Did you hear that?" I asked after the 3rd or 4th time. "Hear what?" Vanessa was consulting her brother's hand-drawn map. "I don't know. Something moving," Daniela laughed. "It's the woods." "Things move in the woods?" "No, I mean, it sounds like—" I trailed off, unable to articulate what exactly was bothering me. Never mind. We continued hiking, the trail gradually becoming steeper and narrower. By midday, we stopped in a small clearing to eat lunch. The sunlight filtered through the canopy above, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. It should have been beautiful, but I couldn't relax. My eyes kept darting to the tree line, expecting to see— what? I didn't know. "You're jumpy today," Daniela observed, passing me a granola bar. "Just tired, I guess," I lied. "Didn't sleep well last night." After lunch, we pressed on. The trail became more challenging, with fallen trees to climb over and steep inclines that left us breathless. Despite the physical exertion, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. Several times, I thought I glimpsed movement among the trees, a shadow moving independently of the swaying branches, a flash of blue that could have been a shirt, but each time I looked more carefully, there was nothing. By late afternoon, we reached our destination, a small plateau overlooking a valley with a stream gurgling nearby. It was picturesque, exactly the sort of place that would appear on a postcard, advertising the serenity of nature. "This is perfect," Vanessa declared, dropping her pack with a relieved sigh. I forced a smile. "Yeah, perfect." As we set up camp, I positioned myself to keep the trail in view, just in case. Setting up camp provided a welcome distraction from my growing unease. The physical tasks of pitching the tent, gathering firewood, and filtering water from the stream required enough concentration to momentarily quiet the nagging voice in my head that kept whispering warnings. "Have you ever seen stars like this?" Daniela asked as the sun began to set, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. I had to admit, the view was spectacular. As darkness fell, the stars emerged one by one until the sky was ablaze with them, far more numerous and brilliant than what we could see from our light-polluted hometown. Vanessa got a fire going, a small, contained blaze that cast a circle of warmth and light around our campsite. We roasted hot dogs on sticks and made s'mores, the familiar activities almost making me forget my earlier anxiety. Almost. As night fully descended, the forest around us transformed. The cheerful daylight sounds, bird song, rustling leaves, the gentle babble of the stream, gave way to more ominous noises. Hoots, screeches, and distant howls punctuated the darkness, though I knew they were just ordinary nocturnal creatures. Each sound made my muscles tense. "Let's tell ghost stories," Daniela suggested, her face eerily illuminated by the flickering firelight. "How about no?" I countered, adding another log to the fire. Vanessa chuckled. "What's wrong? Scared of the dark?" "Yes," I wanted to say. "I'm terrified right now, and I don't know why." Instead, I forced a laugh. "I just don't want to give myself nightmares." "These woods are creepy enough. They're just trees," Daniela said with a shrug. "Nothing here that can hurt us." I wasn't so sure. The darkness beyond our firelight seemed impenetrable, a solid wall of black that could hide anything or anyone. Again, I found myself straining to identify sounds in the distance, to separate normal forest noises from something else. "Did you see something?" Vanessa asked, noticing my frequent glances into the darkness. "No," I lied, "just making sure the fire doesn't spread." We stayed up late, talking and laughing, as we often did during our weekend sleepovers. The familiarity of our conversation provided some comfort, but I couldn't fully relax. Every time the fire crackled or a twig snapped in the distance, I flinched. Eventually, exhaustion won out over alertness. We doused the fire until only glowing embers remained and retreated to our tent. Inside the thin nylon walls, I positioned myself near the zippered entrance, my back to my friends, facing the way we had come. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by sounds both real and imagined. Each time I drifted off, the same unsettling dream jolted me awake. A figure standing motionless at the edge of our campsite, watching, waiting. Every time I woke, I had to remind myself it was just a dream. Just my mind processing the day's anxieties, until it wasn't. I jerked awake sometime in the deepest part of the night, my heart hammering against my ribs. The inside of the tent was pitch black, and for a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or what had woken me. Then I heard it again, a distinct crunching sound, like someone deliberately stepping on fallen leaves. Not an animal, a person. I held my breath, straining to listen through the thin fabric of the tent. Beside me, Vanessa and Daniela slept soundly, their breathing deep and regular. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by what could only be described as a slow exhalation. My entire body tensed. Someone was outside our tent, moving slowly around the perimeter. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, a deer perhaps, or even a bear, but animals don't move with such deliberate stealth. I wanted to wake my friends, but fear paralyzed me. What if I was wrong? What if it was nothing? Would they ever let me live it down? The footsteps circled the tent once, twice, then stopped directly outside the entrance. I could see the faint outline of a shadow against the fabric, a human silhouette standing perfectly still. For several excruciating minutes, nothing happened. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there as if waiting. My lungs burned from holding my breath, and my fingers curled around the edge of my sleeping bag so tightly they went numb. Then, slowly, the zipper of our tent began to move, up, inch by inch, the sound deafening in the silence of the night. My mind raced through 1,000 terrifying possibilities: a deranged hunter, an escaped convict, the man from the gas station who had somehow followed us. I couldn't wait any longer. I lurched forward, grabbing the zipper from inside and yanking it back down. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shrill with fear. The shadow disappeared instantly. There was a flurry of movement outside, rapid footsteps retreating into the woods, and then silence. "What the hell?" Daniela mumbled, sitting up groggily. "What's going on?" "Someone was outside," I whispered, trembling so violently I could barely form the words. "Someone tried to open our tent." Vanessa fumbled for her headlamp, switching it on. The sudden glare made me wince. "What, are you sure?" "Positive. I saw their shadow. They were right here." Daniela crawled to the entrance, cautiously unzipping it just enough to peer outside. "There's nothing there now." "They ran when I called out," I insisted. Vanessa looked skeptical. "Maybe it was an animal?" "Animals don't unzip tents," I snapped. We sat in tense silence, listening to the night sounds. Nothing seemed amiss now, just the normal chorus of insects and the occasional distant call of an owl. After 15 minutes of vigilant listening, Daniela sighed. "It was probably just the wind moving the zipper," she suggested. "Or maybe you were dreaming." "I wasn't dreaming," I said firmly. "Someone was out there." Despite my certainty, I couldn't prove it. There were no footprints visible in the beam of Vanessa's headlamp, no evidence of an intruder. Eventually, my friends drifted back to sleep, convinced I had experienced a particularly vivid nightmare. But I stayed awake, sitting upright in my sleeping bag, staring at the zipped entrance of the tent. I knew what I had seen. Someone had found us in these remote woods, someone who had stood watching us sleep, someone who had tried to get inside our tent, and I was terrified they would return. The night stretched endlessly, each minute crawling by as I maintained my vigilant watch. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the hooting of an owl, the soft breathing of my sleeping friends, seemed magnified in the darkness. I didn't dare close my eyes, convinced that the moment I succumbed to sleep, the mysterious visitor would return. When the first weak light of dawn finally began to filter through the tent walls, I nearly wept with relief. Exhaustion weighed on me like a physical burden, but fear had kept me rigidly awake. "You look terrible," Daniela observed when she woke, stretching in her sleeping bag. "Did you sleep at all?" "No," I admitted, my voice hoarse. I kept watch. Vanessa sat up, rubbing her eyes. "You really think someone was out there?" "I know someone was out there," I insisted. We emerged from the tent cautiously, surveying our campsite in the pale morning light. Nothing seemed disturbed. Our backpacks remained where we had left them. The cooler was undisturbed. The embers of our fire had completely died out. "See?" Daniela gestured around. "Nothing happened." I was about to concede the point when something caught my eye, a flash of color at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden behind a tree. I approached slowly, my heart accelerating with each step. There, hanging on a low branch, was a navy blue flannel shirt. The same shirt the man at the gas station had been wearing. "Guys," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. "Look at this." Vanessa and Daniela joined me, staring at the shirt. "Someone left their shirt?" Daniela suggested, reaching for it. "Don't touch it," I hissed, grabbing her wrist. "It's his. The man from the gas station. He followed us here." Vanessa's face paled. "That's impossible. How would he know where we were going? We didn't even tell him." "I don't know," I admitted. "But this is his shirt. I'm sure of it." We stood there, staring at the garment as if it might suddenly animate and attack us. The implications were terrifying. Not only had someone been watching us, but they had deliberately left evidence of their presence, a message that we were not alone. "We need to leave," I said. "Now." For once, neither of my friends argued. We packed up our camp in record time, stuffing equipment haphazardly into our backpacks, not bothering with the careful organization we had used the day before. None of us suggested breakfast. Our appetites had vanished. As we were about to depart, I paused, looking back at the shirt still hanging on the branch. "Should we take it?" Daniela asked, following my gaze. "As evidence." I shuddered at the thought of touching it. "No, let's just go." We set off down the trail at a pace just short of running. Our earlier enjoyment of the forest completely evaporated. Every shadow, every movement in the periphery of my vision sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through my system. We had hiked for perhaps 20 minutes when a sound stopped us in our tracks. A clear, deliberate cracking of branches ahead. Someone was on the trail in front of us. "This way," Vanessa whispered, pointing to a narrow deer path that branched off from the main trail. "We can circle around." We veered off the established path, pushing through underbrush and scrambling over fallen logs. The forest seemed to close in around us, branches clawing at our clothes, roots threatening to trip us. I lost all sense of direction, trusting Vanessa's innate navigational skills to guide us back to the main trail eventually. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, we paused to catch our breath in a small clearing. Daniela pulled out her water bottle with shaking hands. "Do you think we lost him?" she asked. I was about to respond when I saw it, a flash of movement between the trees ahead of us. A figure, partially obscured by foliage, stood watching us. Though the distance made details difficult to discern, I could make out the outline of a man approximately 30 yards away. "There," I breathed, pointing. "Don't move." The figure remained motionless for several seconds, then raised a hand in what could have been a wave or a mocking salute. "Hey!" Vanessa shouted, her voice echoing through the trees. "What do you want?" The figure turned and disappeared into the dense underbrush. "Let's go," I urged, pulling my friends in the opposite direction. "We need to get back to the car." We abandoned any attempt at stealth, crashing through the forest like startled deer. Our only goal was distance, to put as much space as possible between ourselves and our stalker. I had no idea if we were heading in the right direction, but staying still wasn't an option. "Wait," Vanessa gasped after we had been running for several minutes. She pulled out her phone, swiping to access the compass app. "We're going southeast. The car is northwest." We changed direction, moving more deliberately now, trying to balance speed with awareness of our surroundings. Every few minutes we would stop to listen, but the forest had gone unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just the sound of our own labored breathing. "Do you think he's still following us?" Daniela whispered as we paused near a fallen tree. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm not taking any chances." We continued our trek, the terrain becoming increasingly unfamiliar. None of the landmarks matched what we had seen on our hike-in. The realization dawned on me slowly, then with horrifying clarity, we were lost. "Vanessa," I asked, trying to keep the panic from my voice, "do you know where we are?" She studied her phone's compass with growing frustration. "We should have hit the main trail by now." Daniela climbed onto a large rock, scanning the surrounding forest. "I don't see anything that looks familiar." The sun was climbing higher in the sky, its heat intensifying. Our water supplies were dwindling, and the physical and emotional strain of the morning was taking its toll. I felt lightheaded from lack of sleep and food, my limbs heavy with exhaustion. "Let's try to get to higher ground," Vanessa suggested. "Maybe we can see the parking area from there." We began ascending a steep incline, using tree roots and rocks as handholds. The exertion was grueling, but fear provided an inexhaustible source of energy. About halfway up, I glanced back down the slope and froze. There, at the bottom of the hill, stood a man. Even from this distance, I recognized his build and stance. He was looking directly at us, making no attempt to hide. "Go," I whispered urgently, pushing Daniela ahead of me.
"He's there."
"He's watching us." We scrambled up the remainder of the hill, not daring to look back again. At the top was a rocky outcropping that offered a view of the surrounding area. In the distance, perhaps a mile away, I could see what might be the parking area where we had left our car. There, I pointed. I think that's it. Vanessa oriented herself with the compass. It's that way, she said, pointing to a path that would take us down the other side of the hill. If we keep going straight, we should hit the main trail eventually. As we started our descent, a shout echoed from behind us. I just want to talk. The voice was unmistakably male, carrying clearly through the trees. Why are you running? We exchanged horrified glances and increased our pace, half running, half sliding down the steep hillside. Branches whipped at our faces, rocks dislodged beneath our feet, but we didn't slow down. Help me, Daniela gasped suddenly, stumbling to a halt. A branch had caught her backpack strap, yanking her backward. I turned to help her, but the sound of footsteps on the hill above us spurred me to desperate action. I pulled out my pocket knife and sliced through the strap, freeing her but leaving her pack behind. Leave it, I ordered when she hesitated. We can't stop. We continued our frantic descent, eventually reaching level ground and what appeared to be a game trail. Without discussion, we followed it, hoping it would lead us back to civilization. The trail widened gradually, showing signs of human use, boot prints in the mud, a discarded energy bar wrapper. Hope surged through me. We were getting closer to safety. Then, without warning, we emerged onto the main trail. The sight of the clearly marked path nearly brought me to tears of relief. We weren't lost after all. Which way? Daniela asked breathlessly. Vanessa pointed to the right. Oh, that way. I recognized that fallen tree from yesterday. We set off at a jog, our exhausted muscles protesting, but adrenaline driving us forward. The trail seemed impossibly long, each bend offering the promise of the parking area, only to reveal more forest. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the trees thinned and we caught sight of the small clearing where we had parked. Our car sat exactly where we had left it, undisturbed. Keys, I gasped. Get the keys out. Vanessa fumbled in her pocket, producing the car keys with shaking hands. We were 10 yards from the vehicle when a truck pulled into the clearing, blocking our path. The same truck from the gas station. Time seemed to slow as the truck's door opened and the man stepped out. In the harsh daylight, his appearance was even more ordinary than I remembered. Medium build, short brown hair, unremarkable features. He could have been anyone, except for his eyes. They were cold, calculating, assessing us like a predator might regard wounded prey. There you are, he said, his voice eerily calm. I've been looking for you girls. We froze, caught between the dense forest behind us and the man blocking our path to the car. What do you want? Vanessa demanded, her voice stronger than I expected. He smiled, the same smile from the gas station, friendly on the surface but hiding something darker beneath. Just to talk. Is that so scary? You followed us for miles through the woods just to talk? I asked incredulously. He shrugged. You left in such a hurry this morning? I didn't even get to introduce myself properly. How did you find us? Daniela asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His smile widened. I know these woods better than anyone. When I saw you girls heading this way yesterday, I figured you'd be camping at the plateau. It's where everyone goes. The casual way he spoke, as if stalking 3 women through the forest was perfectly normal behavior, sent revulsion coursing through me. Well, we're leaving now, Vanessa stated firmly, taking a step toward our car. The man didn't move from his position between us and the vehicle. So soon, the day's just starting. We could hike together. I could show you some really special places. No thanks, I replied, my mind racing for a way out of this situation. He took a step toward us, and we instinctively backed up. You know, it's dangerous out here for girls alone. All sorts of things can happen in these woods. The threat, though veiled, was unmistakable. My hand closed around the pocket knife in my jacket, a pathetically inadequate defense, but better than nothing. Our boyfriends are meeting us here, Daniela bluffed suddenly. They should be arriving any minute. The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, doubt, perhaps, or recalculation. Is that right?" he asked, his tone still conversational. "Funny, I didn't see any other cars coming up the road. They're hiking in from the North Trail," Vanessa added, building on Daniela's lie. "They stayed at the North campsite last night." I pulled out my phone, pretending to check messages. "They're about 10 minutes away. I should call them to make sure they bring the extra water." I held the phone to my ear, mimicking a conversation. "Hey, where are you guys?" "We're at the car already." "Yeah, we had to leave early." "No, everything's fine, just ready to go." "You're close?" "Great." The man watched this performance, his expression growing increasingly uncertain. He glanced toward the North Trail, then back at us. "Well," he said finally, "I guess I should get going then. Maybe I'll see you around sometime." He turned back toward his truck, but something in his posture suggested he wasn't giving up so easily. This was just a tactical retreat. As soon as he opened his truck door, Vanessa made her move. She sprinted for our car, with Daniela and me close behind. We piled in, slamming the doors and locking them in one fluid motion. The man watched us from his truck, that unsettling smile still on his face. Vanessa started the engine and reversed rapidly, turning the car around to face the exit. As we drove past his truck, he raised his hand in a wave. "See you soon," he called, his voice carrying through our closed windows. Vanessa hit the accelerator, and we sped down the dirt road, dust billowing behind us. No one spoke until we reached the main highway, miles away from the trailhead. "What the hell just happened?" Daniela asked, her voice breaking. "I don't know," I admitted, the full weight of the experience finally hitting me. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. "But I think we need to call the police." We stopped at the first gas station we found, and I used their phone to contact the local sheriff's department. I explained what had happened: the stalking, the shirt left in our camp, the confrontation in the parking area. The deputy who took the report was sympathetic, but not especially alarmed. "Did he threaten you directly?" he asked. "Not in so many words," I admitted. "But he followed us for miles, watched us sleep, and tried to prevent us from leaving." "We'll look into it," the deputy promised. "But without a direct threat or assault, there's not much we can do except warn him to stay away from you. He knows what we look like and what car we drive," Vanessa pointed out. "We don't even know his name." "I'll send a patrol car to the trailhead," the deputy said. "If he's still there, we'll have a talk with him. Can you describe him and his vehicle?" We provided the details, though they were frustratingly generic. Brown hair, average build, blue eyes, driving a dark-colored pickup truck. Nothing distinctive enough to easily identify him in a crowd. The drive home was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The experience had transformed what should have been a pleasant memory into a trauma that would haunt us for years to come. That night, despite being safely home in my own bed, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jerk awake, convinced that someone was outside my window, watching, waiting. I kept seeing the man's face, his unsettling smile, the cold calculation in his eyes. In the days that followed, we learned the police had found no sign of the man at the trailhead. The shirt we had described was gone, as if it had never been there. Without evidence, the case was essentially closed before it began. We returned to college the following week, but the experience changed us. Vanessa became hypervigilant, jumping at unexpected sounds. Daniela refused to go anywhere alone, and I developed an insomnia that medication could barely touch. Years have passed since that camping trip, but I still avoid hiking trails and forests. I still check my locks multiple times before bed, and I still scan every gas station, every parking lot, every crowd for a face I hope never to see again. Because the most terrifying realization wasn't that we were followed or watched or stalked. It was that our pursuer walked away unpunished, free to find other victims, other women to terrorize. And somewhere out there, perhaps at this very moment, he's watching someone else, calculating, planning, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The woods keep his secrets well, too well. The decision to visit the Hawking Hills area of southern Ohio came during a particularly stressful period in my life. By September 2023, work pressures had accumulated to the point where even weekends offered little respite. My husband James suggested a week-long getaway, something to disconnect us from our digital lives and reconnect as a family. Our children, 9-year-old Will, who is nonverbal and autistic, and 5-year-old Lily, deserved more attention than our divided focus had allowed lately. We found a secluded cabin through an online rental service, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. The property boasted hiking trails, a small stream, and crucially, no reliable internet connection. The isolation appealed to me in theory, though I couldn't have predicted how that very isolation would later become our greatest fear. 3 days into our stay, after exploring nearby trails and allowing ourselves to relax into the rhythm of rural life, I remembered something I'd read about years ago, the abandoned ghost town of Moonville and its infamous rail tunnel. Once a thriving mining community in the 1800s, Moonville had been reduced to almost nothing, just a tunnel cutting through the hillside and a few scattered foundations reclaimed by forest. I've always wanted to see the Moonville Tunnel, I told James over breakfast. It's supposed to be this perfect piece of preserved history, and apparently it's not far from here. James looked up from helping Will with his eggs. Is it accessible? Safe for the kids? From what I remember reading, there's a parking area and a trail. People visit it all the time. I scrolled through my phone's spotty connection, trying to pull up information. Look, there's even a footbridge. It's practically a tourist spot. Lily, overhearing our conversation, bounced in her seat. I want to see the ghost tunnel. It's not actually haunted, sweetie, I said, though the local legends claimed otherwise. It's just old and interesting. James looked uncertain. How far is it? Maybe 30 minutes. I can download directions before we lose signal completely. He nodded slowly. All right, but we should head back well before dark. These country roads aren't exactly well lit, I agreed, downloading a Google Maps route to the location. The reviews I quickly scanned described it as atmospheric and a photographer's dream. None mentioned any danger beyond the typical cautions about uneven terrain. How thoroughly I would come to regret this seemingly innocent decision. We departed around noon the following day. Will seemed content in the back seat with his weighted blanket and favorite pressure toy, while Lily pressed her face against the window, narrating imaginary adventures to her stuffed rabbit. James drove initially, but after we left the main highway and began navigating increasingly narrow roads, I took over. Our Mercedes, a pre-owned vehicle I'd purchased 3 years ago after a substantial promotion, felt increasingly out of place as the landscape changed. The homes we passed grew more sparse and dilapidated. Rusted appliances decorated front yards. Weathered political signs from multiple election cycles back stood like faded sentries. This is... James trailed off, glancing at a property where 3 partially dismantled trucks sat atop cinder blocks. Rural poverty, I finished quietly, mindful of Lily's attentive ears. These communities were built around industries that disappeared decades ago. The GPS directed us onto a particularly narrow road where tree branches scraped against our car's roof. I slowed to avoid the worst of the potholes, wincing at each unavoidable impact. We haven't seen another vehicle in 20 minutes, James observed, tension evident in his voice. I knew what concerned him without him saying it aloud. As a black family in an impoverished, rural, overwhelmingly white area, we stood out. The luxury car, modest by urban standards, only emphasized our otherness. The tunnel's popular with tourists, I reassured him, though doubt had begun to creep into my own thoughts. We're just visitors passing through, like anyone else. The road narrowed further and began to descend between steepening hillsides. Trees closed in overhead, creating a tunnel of foliage that dimmed the afternoon sun. A wooden sign appeared, weather-beaten and partially obscured by vines, entering Bubba Wood. Bubba Wood? James read aloud, his expression conveying what he wouldn't say in front of the children. Lily giggled. "That's a funny name." Will rocked slightly in his car seat, sensing the mounting tension in the vehicle. The road turned to gravel, then to rough stone that rattled the car's undercarriage alarmingly. Cell service disappeared entirely. The signal bars on our phones replaced by the dreaded no service indicator. "Maybe we should turn back," James suggested quietly. "We must be nearly there," I said, more stubborn than confident. It would be a shame to come all this way and not see it. A sharp curve revealed a small clearing ahead with space for perhaps 4 vehicles to park. No other cars were present. Beyond the makeshift lot, I could see a metal footbridge spanning a shallow creek. "We made it," I announced with forced enthusiasm. Moonville Tunnel awaits. The parking area consisted of packed dirt, surrounded by dense undergrowth. No facilities, no information kiosk, not even a trash can. Just wilderness and the distant sound of running water from the creek below. I parked, facing outward, an unconscious preparation for a quick departure if needed. "Everyone stay close," James instructed as we exited the car. He lifted Will into his arms while I took Lily's hand. The October air felt unexpectedly cold in the shadow of the hills. Fallen leaves crunched beneath our feet as we approached the footbridge, a utilitarian metal structure that appeared newer than its surroundings, likely installed for tourism accessibility. "This bridge looks sturdy enough," I commented, testing the first few steps. "How old is the tunnel, Mom?" Lily asked, clutching my hand tighter as the bridge swayed slightly beneath us. "About 150 years old," I answered. "It was built when trains still ran through these hills." The creek below was shallow but swift, carving through shale that glinted darkly in the filtered sunlight. On the opposite bank, a dirt path led into thicker woods. "I don't like this," James muttered, adjusting Will in his arms. Our son had grown tense, his body rigid against his father's chest. "It's just a short walk to the tunnel," I persisted, pointing to where the path disappeared among the trees. 5 minutes tops." The trail beyond the bridge showed signs of regular use, but remained untamed. Roots crossed our path, and branches reached out like grasping fingers. The surrounding forest absorbed sound in an unsettling way. Our footsteps seemed muffled, our voices quieter than they should have been. As we rounded a bend in the path, the tunnel finally came into view. I stopped involuntarily, taken aback by its scale. The structure was far larger than photographs had suggested, a yawning arch of precisely laid brick cutting directly into the hillside. Dark water seeped from the stonework, creating patterns of discoloration that resembled weeping faces. "It's bigger than I expected," I whispered, almost to myself. Lily tugged at my hand. "Is it haunted for real?" Before I could answer, a sound emanated from within the tunnel's darkness, the distinctive mechanical growl of an engine. "Someone's coming through," James said, pulling us to the side of the path. From the tunnel's opposite end, headlights appeared, revealing a vehicle moving at an uncomfortably high speed considering the terrain. The engine noise amplified within the tunnel's acoustics, creating an aggressive roar that caused Will to press his hands against his ears. A pickup truck, rusted, mud-splattered, and at least 30 years old, emerged from the darkness and skidded to a halt 20 feet from where we stood. The door creaked open, and a man stepped out. The man who emerged from the truck stood well over 6 feet tall, with a frame that suggested decades of physical labor. His age was difficult to determine precisely, somewhere in his 60s, though weather and hardship had carved deep lines into his face. A gray beard, untrimmed and wild, covered much of his features, but his eyes, pale blue and unnervingly alert, fixed immediately on our family. He wore stained canvas pants and a flannel shirt, despite the moderate temperature. What seized my attention, however, was the chainsaw he lifted from the truck bed with practiced ease. James stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between the stranger and our children. "Afternoon," he called, his voice steady, despite the tension evident in his posture. The man didn't immediately respond. He placed the chainsaw on the ground and reached back into the truck, retrieving a can of what appeared to be gasoline. Still silent, he began filling the chainsaw's tank. "We're just visiting the tunnel," I explained, trying to sound casual. "Is it closed today or something?" The man finally looked up. "Public land." His voice was surprisingly soft, with a thick Appalachian accent that rendered the words almost unintelligible. "Free country." "Right," James nodded. "We won't stay long. Just wanted to show the kids." The man secured the cap on the chainsaw and set the gas can aside. He pulled the starter cord, and the machine roared to life with a sound that echoed violently through the tunnel. Will buried his face against James's shoulder, hands still pressed firmly over his ears. "Department of Natural Resources," I asked over the noise, pointing at his equipment. "Are you clearing the trail?" He didn't answer. Instead, he lifted the running chainsaw and began walking, not away from us, but toward the tunnel entrance. As he passed our family, he gestured with his head for us to follow. "What's he doing?" Lily whispered, clutching my leg. "I think he wants to show us something," I replied, though uncertainty gnawed at me. "Let's just be polite for a minute, then we'll head back." The stranger entered the tunnel, the chainsaw's noise multiplying tenfold in the enclosed space. With clear reluctance, James followed, still carrying Will. I gripped Lily's hand tightly as we trailed behind. The tunnel's interior was darker than expected, with sunlight reaching only a short distance from either end. Decades of graffiti covered the walls, some artistic, most crude. Our footsteps echoed on the damp stone floor. The man with the chainsaw moved deliberately, occasionally revving the engine but making no attempt to cut anything. He stopped at various points, gesturing vaguely at the ceiling or walls, but offering no explanation. "Beautiful architecture," I commented awkwardly during a moment when he lowered the chainsaw. He turned toward me, expression unreadable beneath his beard. "Not safe after rainfall," he finally said. "Bricks come loose." "Thanks for the warning," James replied. "We appreciate it." The man nodded, then continued his strange inspection of the tunnel, the chainsaw's roar preventing any further conversation. He stayed uncomfortably close to our family, never more than a few feet away as we made our way through the tunnel. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely less than 10 minutes, we reached the opposite entrance. Beyond lay another section of forest, wilder and less traversed than the path we'd taken. "I think we should head back now," I said firmly, no longer attempting to hide my unease. "Thank you for the tour." The man revved his chainsaw one final time, then switched it off. The sudden silence felt almost as jarring as the noise had been. "Your choice," he said with a shrug. Then inexplicably he added, "People get lost out here sometimes." We turned back, walking as briskly as dignity would allow toward the footbridge and our waiting car. Behind us, the chainsaw roared to life again, its sound echoing through the tunnel and following us like an auditory shadow. "Walk faster," James muttered, adjusting Will's weight in his arms. Lily struggled to keep pace with our longer strides. "Why is that man so scary, Mommy?" "He's just doing his job, sweetie," I lied, lifting her into my arms despite the strain. "Some people aren't good with strangers." We reached the footbridge in half the time it had taken us to approach the tunnel. My heart rate didn't slow until we crossed over the creek, putting a physical barrier between us and the man. "Get the kids in the car," James said as we approached the parking area. "I'll make sure everything's ready to go." I strapped Lily into her booster seat while James secured Will. Both children were unusually quiet, sensing our urgency. I turned to enter the driver's side when James called out, "Hey, did you touch the car while I was getting Will situated?" I frowned. "No, why?" He pointed to the rear passenger door. "Look at this." I moved closer and felt my stomach contract. Dusty handprints, at least 4 distinct impressions, marked the vehicle's glossy black surface. They were larger than mine, larger than James's, positioned as if someone had leaned against the car while peering inside. "That's impossible," I whispered. We were together the entire time. James ran his hand through his dreadlocks, a nervous habit I recognized from 12 years of marriage. Maybe someone came through while we were in the tunnel? And just touched our car. For what purpose? The implications made my skin crawl. We need to leave now. As if summoned by our discovery, the sound of an engine approached from the direction of the footbridge. We looked up to see the pickup truck rumbling. A crossing I would have thought impossible, given the bridge's narrow width. "Get in," James urged, opening the driver's door for me before hurrying to the passenger side. I started the engine as the pickup reached our side of the creek. The man parked directly behind us, effectively blocking the only exit from the clearing. He emerged from his truck, chainsaw noticeably absent, and began walking away from us toward a barely visible trail branching from the main path. Relief flooded through me as I realized he wasn't approaching our vehicle. I shifted into reverse, prepared to maneuver around his truck if necessary, when he stopped and turned back to look at us. Though too distant to see his expression clearly, I felt the weight of his gaze. Then, with deliberate slowness, he raised his hand in what might have been interpreted as a wave. "Go," James said quietly. "Just go." I navigated carefully around the pickup truck and accelerated onto the stone road, eager to put distance between our family and the unsettling encounter. The car bounced violently over the rough surface, forcing me to slow despite my desire to flee. "Is he following us?" I asked, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. James turned to look through the rear window. No sign of him yet. "Maybe he was just a local eccentric," I suggested, trying to rationalize the experience. "Someone who takes it upon himself to watch over the tunnel." "With a chainsaw?" James raised an eyebrow. "And those handprints on the car? Someone was watching our children while we were gone." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "But that's not possible. We were only in the tunnel for minutes, and we were with that man the entire time." "Unless there was someone else," James said quietly. The implication hung in the air between us. I checked on the children in the rearview mirror. Lily had fallen asleep, exhausted by the excitement and fear. Will stared out the window, his fingers moving in repetitive patterns against his weighted toy. We continued in tense silence for several minutes, the narrow road twisting through increasingly dense forest. Without cell service, we were navigating purely by memory of the route we'd taken earlier. "We should be reaching that split in the road soon," I said. "Then it's just another 10 minutes to the highway." James nodded, then suddenly tensed. "What's that behind us?" I glanced at the mirror and felt my heart rate spike. A cloud of dust rose from the road behind us, and within it, the unmistakable outline of a pickup truck. "It's him," I whispered. "How did he catch up so quickly?" "There must be another road, a shortcut he knows." James's voice remained measured, but I could hear the controlled fear beneath his words. "Don't stop, whatever happens." I pressed the accelerator harder, accepting the punishment to our vehicle's suspension in exchange for speed. The Mercedes responded admirably, putting more distance between us and our pursuer. "We're losing him," I said, relief evident in my voice. But as we rounded a bend, the road narrowed further between two steep embankments. A fallen tree branch partially blocked the path ahead, forcing me to slow dramatically to navigate around it. "Careful," James cautioned. "If we get stuck out here—" He didn't need to finish the thought. By the time we'd maneuvered past the obstacle, the pickup had reappeared in the mirror, closer than before. "He's gaining," I said unnecessarily. "What does he want from us?" James didn't answer, his attention fixed on the road ahead. "There's the split. Go right." I turned sharply, remembering this junction from our journey in. The relief was short-lived, however. After another quarter mile, The surroundings no longer matched my memory. "This isn't right," I said, slowing slightly. "I don't recognize this stretch." "Keep going," James insisted. "Any road that gets us out of these woods is the right road." The pickup had disappeared from view, but that offered little comfort. The forest pressed in around us, branches forming a canopy that dimmed the afternoon light to an eerie twilight. "I think I took a wrong turn," I admitted finally. "This isn't the way we came." The unfamiliar road narrowed further, wending between trees whose branches scraped against our windows like fingernails. Worry gnawed at me as the Mercedes struggled over increasingly uneven terrain. "We need to turn around," I decided, scanning for a spot wide enough to maneuver. James nodded grimly. "Do it quickly." I found a small clearing and executed a three-point turn, wincing as underbrush scraped the car's undercarriage. Once reoriented, we retraced our path to the junction. "Left this time," James directed. "That has to be the correct route." As we approached the split in the road, Will suddenly became agitated in the back seat, rocking forward against his restraints and making distressed vocalizations. "It's okay, buddy," James soothed, reaching back to touch our son's knee. "We're heading home now." But Will's distress only intensified as we turned left onto what I hoped was the correct road. Something about this direction triggered his anxiety, and Will's instincts, though filtered through his unique perception, often proved remarkably accurate. "What is it?" I asked, slowing the car slightly. "What's wrong?" James scanned the road ahead, then pointed. "There, look." About a quarter-mile ahead, where the forest receded slightly from the roadside, stood a single ramshackle house. Its weathered clapboards had faded to the same grey as the surrounding trees, making it nearly invisible until you were almost upon it. A sagging porch wrapped around the front, cluttered with indistinguishable objects, and parked in the dirt yard was the pickup truck. "That's impossible," I whispered. "He was behind us." "How could he?" "He knows these woods," James interrupted. "Probably has been driving these roads his entire life." I stopped the car, maintaining distance from the property. "What do we do? We can't go forward, and we don't know another way out." "We have to go back to the main road," James decided. "Find another route, even if it takes us miles out of our way." I nodded and began to turn the car around again. As I did, movement on the house's porch caught my attention. The man had emerged and stood watching us, perfectly still, except for his beard shifting in the breeze. "Don't make eye contact," James said quietly. "Just drive." I completed the turn and accelerated away from the house. In the rearview mirror, I could see the man hadn't moved from his position on the porch. Somehow, his stillness was more unsettling than pursuit would have been. "He must have known we'd make a wrong turn," I said. "He drove straight to his house and waited for us to pass. Or he wanted us to see where he lives," James suggested. "To know that he's always here, always watching." The implication sent a wave of nausea through me. We drove in tense silence, retracing our path past the junction and onto what we now recognized as the correct road. We gradually calmed as we put distance between ourselves and the house. "We're going to be okay," I reassured everyone, including myself. "We're almost out of these woods." The stone road finally gave way to gravel, then to poorly maintained asphalt. Signs of civilization, fences, power lines, occasional mailboxes began to reappear. When my phone chimed with a notification indicating restored cell service, I nearly wept with relief. "Call the police?" James suggested. I considered this briefly before shaking my head. "And tell them what? That a local man with a chainsaw showed us a tourist attraction? That someone touched our car? That he drove home afterward? They'd think we were paranoid city people overreacting to country ways." James didn't argue, though I could tell he disagreed. We continued in silence until we reached the highway, mainstream America reasserting itself with gas stations and fast food restaurants. Only then did the knot of tension in my chest begin to loosen. The remainder of our vacation passed without incident, though neither James nor I fully relaxed. We stayed close to the cabin, finding excuses to avoid further exploration of the surrounding area. The children, resilient as always, seemed to forget the experience within days, but traces of it lingered in small behavioral changes. Will's reluctance to be separated from James, Lily's newfound fear of mechanical noises. On our final evening in Ohio, after the children had gone to bed, I found James on the cabin's porch, staring into the darkness beyond our small circle of light. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, joining him on the weathered bench. "Those handprints," he answered without hesitation. "I can't reconcile it. We were never away from the car long enough for someone to approach it without being seen from the tunnel entrance. Unless there were multiple people," I suggested. "The man with the chainsaw is a distraction, someone else checking out the car." James considered this. "For what purpose, though? Nothing was stolen. Nothing was damaged. Intimidation? Curiosity about outsiders? Maybe they don't get many visitors that look like us." I leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Or maybe—" James hesitated. "Maybe we've overthought this entire situation. Maybe there's an innocent explanation we're missing because we were primed to be afraid." I wanted to believe this possibility, but the memory of the man's pale eyes following our movements contradicted any benign interpretation. The deliberate way he had brandished the chainsaw, the handprints positioned to peer into where our children sat. "There's something else," I admitted. "Something I haven't told you." James turned to look at me, concern evident in his expression. "When we were driving away from his house," I continued, "I looked in the mirror and saw him still standing on that porch. He raised his hand, like he had in the clearing. But this time," I swallowed hard, "this time he was holding something that caught the light, something that looked like car keys." Understanding dawned in James's eyes. "You think he somehow made a copy of our key? That's not possible with modern vehicles. There are chips, security systems. I know it doesn't make logical sense," I interrupted. "But nothing about that encounter did. And when we get home, I'm having the locks changed on the car, the house, everything." James didn't argue. Instead, he put his arm around me, and we sat watching the darkness until the cold drove us inside. We left early the next morning, taking a route that deliberately avoided the vicinity of Moonville Tunnel. As we crossed the Ohio state line, I felt a weight lift, a sensation of escaping something that had been quietly hunting us. 2 weeks after returning home, a small package arrived in our mailbox. No return address, no identifying information. Inside was a single car key, not a copy of our Mercedes key, but an older model that wouldn't work in any modern vehicle. Attached was a handwritten note on yellowed paper: "Visitors always welcome back in Bubba Wood." I destroyed both items immediately, telling no one, not even James. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I find myself checking that our doors are locked, listening for the distant sound of a chainsaw's engine echoing through the darkness beyond our home. Some tunnels, I've learned, don't end where you think they do. Some lead to places you carry with you long after you've left them behind. Back in 2015, my wife Iris and I, along with our friends Jake and Tabby, had been planning this hiking trip for many weeks. We all worked together at Westlake Publishing, a small but demanding firm where vacation time was as rare as winter sunshine in Seattle. I was a senior editor handling our non-fiction titles. Iris managed our digital marketing. Jake worked in accounting, and Tabby led our design team. Our schedules rarely aligned, making this opportunity almost miraculous. "I can't believe we actually pulled this off," I said during our weekly planning lunch. The four of us had squeezed into our usual corner booth at the cafe across from our office building. 3 consecutive days without a single deadline, Iris added, her eyes bright with anticipation. At 34, she maintained the enthusiasm of someone a decade younger, which was one of the countless reasons I'd fallen in love with her. Jake, Always the practical one, spread a detailed trail map across the table. The Morrison Ridge has some of the most spectacular views in the state. We'll start here, he traced a blue line with his finger, and follow this trail to Crescent Lake. If we push ourselves, we might even make it to the summit overlook. I've already packed all the emergency supplies, Tabby interrupted, brushing her copper hair away from her face. First aid kit, flares, water purification tablets. And I've got the good whiskey, Jake added with a grin. The plan was to head out early Saturday morning and spend the entire day exploring the wilderness. We'd camp overnight and return Sunday evening, giving ourselves Monday to recover before diving back into our professional lives on Tuesday. It was the perfect escape, or so we thought. In the days leading up to our trip, we obsessively checked weather forecasts. Spring in the Pacific Northwest was notoriously unpredictable, but every report promised clear skies and mild temperatures. I remember feeling an unusual sense of optimism as I packed my hiking gear the night before. Iris and I moved around our bedroom in comfortable silence, our excitement palpable without needing words. "Do you think we should bring extra socks?" Iris asked, holding up 2 pairs. "Always," I replied, thinking about the many stories I'd edited about hikers who suffered because they'd neglected such simple precautions. That night, I slept restlessly, my mind racing with anticipation rather than fear. If only I'd known what awaited us on Morrison Ridge, I might never have closed my eyes again. We'd mapped out a trail that promised stunning views, and we were all eager to disconnect from the world. Jake had even suggested we leave our phones behind, but Tabby, ever the voice of reason, insisted we bring them for emergencies, a decision that would later prove crucial. The drive to the trailhead was peaceful. The sun was just starting to rise, casting the entire landscape in a magnificent orange glow. We were laughing, swapping stories, and enjoying the early start. I distinctly remember Iris singing along to the radio, her voice merging with the melody in a way that made my heart swell. Jake and Tabby were in the back seat, debating the merits of various hiking boots. Everything felt perfect, suspended in that golden moment between anticipation and experience. Weather report said clear skies all day, Jake mentioned as we turned onto the gravel road leading to the trailhead. We couldn't have picked a better weekend. The parking area was empty when we arrived, another good sign. We'd have the trail to ourselves, away from the weekend warriors and tourist groups that often crowded popular hiking spots. I pulled into a space near the trailhead sign and killed the engine. "First one's here," I announced, feeling a strange pride in our early arrival. But as soon as we stepped out of the SUV, our excitement took a devastating hit. The sky darkened almost instantly, as if someone had drawn a heavy curtain across the sun. Within minutes, it started to downpour with such intensity that visibility dropped to mere feet in front of us. "What the hell?" Jake shouted over the sudden roar of rain. This wasn't in the forecast. The rain hammered against our bodies with unusual force. It wasn't just rain. It was as though the sky had split open and unleashed its full fury upon us. We scrambled back into the vehicle, slamming doors and gasping from the shocking transition. "It was clear literally 30 seconds ago," Tabby said, wiping water from her face. "This is insane." We hoped it was just a passing shower and decided to wait it out in the car. We'd already made the 2-hour drive. Turning around wasn't an option we wanted to consider. The rain pounded against the roof and the windows fogged up with our breath. Water streamed down the glass in sheets, distorting the outside world into a blurry, shapeless void. "Should we check the radar?" Iris suggested, pulling out her phone, only to find we had no service. "Great. No signal." Jake leaned forward from the back seat, his expression unusually serious. "You know, there's a reason they call this part of the mountain range the Weather Maker. Local legend says storms can form out of nowhere." "Thanks for mentioning that now," I replied, trying to keep my tone light despite a growing unease. After about 20 minutes, The rain mysteriously let up, leaving behind a misty, overcast landscape that bore little resemblance to the sunny morning we'd driven through. The trees dripped steadily, and the trail had transformed into a muddy stream. We debated whether we should continue the hike. The weather had shifted so dramatically that it seemed foolish to proceed. Yet we'd been planning this escape for months. The trail was still calling us, and we didn't want to waste our precious time off. "We're already here," Jake said, adjusting his backpack. "A little rain never hurt anyone." "That wasn't a little rain," Tabby countered. "And the trail conditions will be terrible." Iris caught my eye, and I could read her thoughts perfectly. We needed this break, this adventure, regardless of the conditions. We spent our days indoors, editing manuscripts and attending meetings. This was our chance to experience something real, even if that reality was wet and muddy. "We came prepared for bad weather," I said finally. "Let's give it a try. We can always turn back if it gets worse." With unanimous, if tentative, agreement, we grabbed our gear and headed out. The air felt unusually heavy, saturated with moisture that clung to our skin. The forest around us had transformed. What should have been a vibrant green woodland was now a shadowy labyrinth of dripping trees and swirling mist. We'd barely made it a quarter-mile up the trail when the rain started again, this time even harder than before. It was like someone had turned on a faucet directly above us, and we were drenched within seconds. "This is ridiculous," Iris shouted over the deafening downpour. We turned back, running toward the parking lot, laughing and cursing simultaneously, trying to shield ourselves from the relentless water. The trail had become treacherous, with slick mud threatening to take our feet out from under us at every step. By the time the car came into view through the curtain of rain, we were soaked to our skin, our clothes heavy and clinging uncomfortably. But as we reached the car, we saw something that made us all stop in our tracks. Standing next to our SUV was a young woman. She was soaked to the bone, her clothes clinging to her thin frame like rags. She looked as though she had been through hell. Her hair was matted against her skull, and her face was covered with what appeared to be dirt or mud. At first, I thought perhaps I was seeing things because of the rain. But no, she was definitely real and standing directly next to my car. Even more unsettling was that she appeared to be looking into the windows. Without thinking, I shouted, "Hey, get away from my car!" It was more out of fear than anger, an instinctive response to a situation that felt inherently wrong. I felt a rush of adrenaline surge through my body, every instinct warning me that something wasn't right. She didn't move. She stood there staring at us with hollow eyes that seemed to look through rather than at us. Her gaze reminded me of photographs I'd seen of shell-shocked soldiers, present in body but absent in mind. Before I could shout again, Iris grabbed my arm. "Wait," she whispered urgently. "She looks hurt." Jake and Tabby remained silent behind us, uncertain how to respond. I didn't want to let this stranger into our car, but I couldn't ignore the possibility that she might be in serious trouble. What if she'd been attacked? What if she was running from someone? The moral implications of leaving her in this deluge were impossible to dismiss. Against my better judgment, we approached her cautiously. Up close, I could see that her lips had a bluish tint, suggesting hypothermia might be setting in. Her clothes were inappropriate for hiking, thin cotton rather than moisture-wicking materials, and she wore canvas shoes instead of boots. "Are you okay?" Iris asked gently. "Do you need help?" The woman's eyes finally focused, but her expression remained unsettlingly blank. When she spoke, her voice was raspy, as though unused for days. "Car broke down. Miles back. Been walking. Where were you headed?" Jake asked, stepping forward. She didn't answer directly. "Just need to get somewhere warm." An internal debate raged within me. Every crime documentary I'd ever watched screamed caution, yet my humanitarian instincts couldn't ignore someone in distress. I made a decision I would later regret with every fiber of my being. "We can give you a ride to the nearest town," I offered. We all piled into the SUV with the woman sitting behind the front passenger seat. Iris positioned herself in the middle seat of the back, trying to comfort this stranger. The car felt immediately cramped, windows fogging up again from the sudden influx of bodies. The tension was suffocating. What had begun as a fun hiking trip had transformed into something entirely different and increasingly disturbing. The woman didn't speak. She just sat there, shivering and staring straight ahead with unfocused eyes. Iris, always the empathetic one, worried aloud that she might be in shock. The stranger had makeup running down her cheeks, creating dark rivulets that made it impossible to determine whether they resulted from rain or tears. "What's your name?" Tabby asked, turning in her seat to face our unexpected passenger. No response. "Where exactly did your car break down?" Jake tried. Again, silence. I kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, attempting to read her expressions, but there was nothing there, just a vacant stare. Her eyes were open, but nothing seemed to register. It was as if her body was present while her mind remained elsewhere. The rain continued its assault on the vehicle, creating a constant drumming that filled the uncomfortable silence. I turned on the heater, hoping to combat the chill that had settled over all of us, but especially our mysterious passenger. Jake leaned forward from his seat. "Oh, we should get her to the nearest gas station and call for help," he suggested, in a low voice. We all agreed. There was no cell service in this remote area, so that was our best option. I started the car and began navigating the muddy road. The windshield wipers worked frantically to maintain visibility, but the deluge was overwhelming. The road had transformed into a river of mud, making steering precarious. Every few seconds, I felt the wheels lose traction, causing my knuckles to whiten as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Something still wasn't sitting right with me. It wasn't just the tension of the situation, it was everything about this woman. The way she had appeared out of nowhere. Her complete silence, the way she didn't seem affected by the cold or rain in the way a normal person would be. It was clear she had issues, but it was impossible to determine whether she was dangerous or genuinely traumatized. I could sense my wife and friends trying to maintain calm, but the discomfort was evident, especially in Tabby. She kept her body pressed against the passenger door, maximizing the distance between herself and the stranger. Jake maintained a forced conversational tone, periodically attempting to elicit some response from our passenger, but his questions evaporated into the tense atmosphere without acknowledgement. The nearest gas station was about 15 minutes away under normal conditions. In this weather, with the roads deteriorating by the minute, I estimated it would take us closer to 25. I tried to focus solely on driving, but my mind kept circling back to the woman. Who was she? What was she doing out here alone? Why wouldn't she speak? We were about 2 minutes from the gas station when everything changed. The woman, who had been completely silent for the entire journey, suddenly started to scream. It wasn't an ordinary scream. It was a loud, high-pitched, guttural sound that startled me so violently that I momentarily lost control of the vehicle. She began thrashing around in the back seat, striking the windows and seats with unexpected strength. Iris tried to calm her, but the woman's movements became increasingly erratic and violent. I struggled to keep the SUV on the road, but the combination of the slick conditions and the chaos behind me made it nearly impossible. "What's happening?" Tabby shrieked, pressing herself against the door. "Hold her down!" Jake shouted to Iris, unbuckling his seatbelt to help. But it was too late. The car veered off the road and into a ditch with a sickening lurch. The impact wasn't severe. We'd been traveling at reduced speed due to the conditions, but it was enough to throw us all forward against our seatbelts. The engine stalled, and for a moment everything was silent except for the relentless pounding of rain against the metal roof. We were all breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. I had a minor scrape on my forehead from hitting the steering wheel, but a quick assessment suggested everyone else was physically unharmed. Then the woman began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle before escalating into full-blown hysterics. It was a cold, empty laugh that sent involuntary shivers through my body. She wasn't hurt or scared, she was amused. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Jake shouted at her, his face contorted with anger and fear. The woman's insane laughter came to an abrupt end. With movements too quick to counter, she pulled out a small blade from inside her shirt, a box cutter with the metal edge extended. She drove her left elbow into Iris's neck, pinning my wife against the seat, while simultaneously holding the blade to Tabby's throat. "Give me all your money now," she demanded, her voice entirely devoid of emotion. The most unsettling aspect of this nightmare was the complete absence of fear in her voice. There was only a sick satisfaction, as though she'd executed this scenario countless times before. Her eyes, previously vacant, now gleamed with a predatory intensity that made my stomach turn. We didn't argue. We emptied our wallets, handing over cash, credit cards, and anything else of value. Iris was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. Jake was cursing under his breath, and I was desperately trying to maintain composure, knowing that any sudden movement could result in disaster. The woman grabbed the money and valuables, stuffing everything into her pockets. Then, without warning, she threw open the car door and sprinted into the rain without looking back. We sat in stunned silence, the back door hanging open, rain pouring in. After several seconds of shocked immobility, I finally managed to restart the car. Iris closed the door, her hands visibly trembling, and I carefully backed out of the ditch. Nobody spoke as we drove the remaining distance to the gas station. What could we possibly say? We'd been manipulated, threatened, and robbed by someone we'd tried to help. The gas station attendant looked alarmed when we stumbled in, soaked and visibly shaken. He immediately called the police while offering us towels and hot coffee. The small convenience store, with its fluorescent lighting and mundane products, seemed surreally normal after what we'd just experienced. When the sheriff arrived, he took our statements with a practiced efficiency that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd heard such a story. "You folks aren't the first to get taken in by her," he said, closing his notebook. "We've had reports of a woman matching this description, pulling similar stunts throughout the county for months now." "Why haven't you caught her?" Jake demanded, his hands still shaking as he clutched his coffee cup. The sheriff sighed. "Limited resources, vast wilderness. She knows these mountains better than my deputies. Disappears like smoke." "She could have killed us," Tabby said quietly, voicing the thought that had been circling in all our minds. "But she didn't," the sheriff noted. "Never does. Takes what she wants and vanishes. We think she might be living off the grid somewhere up in the northern section of the forest." As we provided descriptions and details, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd encountered something more disturbing than a simple robbery. The woman's behavior, her initial catatonia followed by manic violence, suggested deeper psychological issues than mere criminality. "Is she mentally ill?" Iris asked hesitantly. The sheriff's expression darkened. "We have reason to believe she might have escaped from Pinewood Psychiatric Facility about 8 months ago. Patient went missing during a transfer. Records sealed, so we can't be certain, but the timing matches." This revelation sent a new wave of horror through me. We hadn't just encountered a desperate person or ordinary criminal. We'd been at the mercy of someone potentially suffering from severe psychological disturbance, someone unpredictable and untethered from normal human constraints. By the time we finished with the police, the rain had finally stopped. We stood in the gas station parking lot, surveying our mud-splattered vehicle. The hiking trip was obviously over, but the decision to return home immediately was unanimous and unspoken. The drive back was subdued. Occasional attempts at conversation died quickly, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I kept replaying the events, analyzing each moment and decision that had led us to this point. Should I have trusted my initial instinct and kept driving? Could we have helped her without putting ourselves at risk? The questions multiplied without resolution. To this day, I have no idea who that woman truly was or where she came from. In the weeks following our encounter, I obsessively researched crimes in the area, scouring local newspapers and online reports for any information. I found scattered accounts of similar incidents, hikers and campers, reporting a strange woman who appeared, distressed before robbing them, but nothing that provided closure. The sheriff called once to inform us they'd found our credit cards, discarded along a remote forest road, but there was no further progress in the investigation. Eventually, like most unsolved cases in rural areas, it faded from official priority, but it never faded from my mind. The immediate aftermath was predictable: nightmares, jumpiness, a newfound suspicion of strangers. Iris and I installed a comprehensive security system in our home. Jake started carrying pepper spray. Tabby began seeing a therapist to process the trauma. We all developed new routines and precautions, accommodations to fear that gradually became normal. What lingered most persistently wasn't the robbery itself, but the psychological violation. We had extended compassion and received calculated malice in return. That exchange fundamentally altered how I viewed humanity. 6 months after the incident, we received an unexpected call from the sheriff's department. They'd found a makeshift campsite deep in the national forest that they believed belonged to our attacker. Among the scattered possessions was a notebook containing detailed accounts of numerous robberies, including ours. The entries were disturbing, clinical descriptions devoid of emotion, as though documenting scientific experiments rather than crimes against fellow humans. The woman herself remained at large, a ghost haunting the wilderness and the darker corners of my mind. Sometimes when it rains heavily, I find myself staring out windows, half expecting to see her standing there, watching me with those empty eyes. I imagine her still out there, targeting other good Samaritans, exploiting human kindness for her survival. We never attempted that hiking trip again. In fact, we've never returned to that part of the state. The wilderness, once a source of rejuvenation and escape, now represents vulnerability and threat. I recognize the irrationality of this response, the statistical improbability of encountering her again. But fear rarely respects statistics. All I know is that we were lucky to escape with our lives. Even though we emerged physically unharmed, the experience fundamentally altered our perception of safety and trust. It makes me physically ill to think that somewhere out there, that wild-eyed woman is most likely terrorizing someone else, manipulating their compassion before revealing the predator beneath the victim's disguise. I've come to understand that the most terrifying monsters aren't supernatural creatures lurking in shadows. They're the humans who walk among us, wearing masks of normalcy or vulnerability until the moment they choose to reveal their true nature. And that revelation, that sudden transformation from victim to victimizer, contains a horror more profound than any ghost story. Because while you can dismiss ghosts as fiction, there's no denying the very real predators who prey on human kindness. They exist. I met one, and I survive with the knowledge that kindness, that most human of virtues, can sometimes lead us directly into danger.